Story 1.
After discovering my wife's cheating, I sent secret footage of her affairs to her friends and family. I had just arrived home on Friday and was eagerly anticipating the weekend. My wife greeted me differently, not with her usual smile and peck, but appearing fidgety and determined about something. It seemed like something was off. I greeted her and inquired about the kids, expressing that it was Friday and they should be home. She informed me that the kids were with Mom until Monday and expressed an urgency in her voice, saying she needed to talk to me. She mentioned having something to tell me, acknowledging that it might be tough for me to grasp. She assured me it wasn't something negative but might be challenging to understand initially. She asked me to try to understand if I loved her. I agreed to try to understand, and she thanked me, stating that it was something that had been on her mind for a long time and might sound silly or strange at first. She then revealed her desire to be fornicating with others, and despite my initial laughter, she conveyed seriousness. I questioned if she was divorcing me, but she reassured me that she loved me and would never leave me. She emphasized that this was something she felt she needed to do. As she explained her desire to explore beyond our marriage, anger replaced my initial shock. I expressed my lack of understanding and disagreement with such a decision. She insisted that she was going to do it, whether I liked it or not, clarifying that she had never cheated on me and had no intention of doing so. She assured me that she had promised to take precautions and not deny me anything in our bed. However, I wasn't fully present in the conversation, and she noticed my mind was wandering. She emphasized that this had nothing to do with us, and made it clear that it was a personal need she felt compelled to fulfill. Despite her pause, I remained motionless and unresponsive. I just sat there, staring, appearing to be all but catatonic. My wife of 17 years had just destroyed me and expected me to actually like it, or at least tolerate it. I didn't, and I wouldn't. Not ever. Veronica, my wife, expressed her need for this change, explaining that she was getting to a stage in life where she really needed it. She shared her history of being a maiden when we married and how she had never known another man. She emphasized her desire to explore and understand lovemaking, clarifying that it was only about the physical aspect. Not love, except with me. I continued to stare, unable to say anything. The revelation that my wife wanted to explore other men, not just one, but multiple, was deeply unsettling. The most shocking part was that she expected me to be okay with it. Veronica urged me to say something, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I rose and headed upstairs to the bedroom, the one that had been ours. Now it meant nothing to me. I felt sick and broken spiritually, my body devoid of sensation. I was overwhelmed with fear. In a remarkably short time, perhaps 15 minutes or less, she had managed to destroy our marriage. I sat on the bed, contemplating, or rather, attempting to contemplate. I knew I had to leave the house and distance myself from my wife, a wife who was on the brink of betraying me, and she was determined to proceed regardless of my feelings. I had been an avid marathon runner in college. Running or taking long walks always helped me clear my thoughts. I decided to walk for a long distance. I changed out of my suit and into comfortable jeans, a Henley shirt, and my $200 running shoes. Grabbing my wallet, a cap, and sunglasses, I descended the stairs. Veronica remained seated in the same spot where she had disclosed her intentions to explore closeness encounters with other men. I paused for a moment, gazing at her once again. She felt like a stranger to me. Glancing back at her, my hand on the doorknob, I asked, "Who are you?" I turned and exited, slamming the door shut behind me. As I briskly moved forward, her words were drowned out as I shut the door forcefully. I was already past the neighbor's house when she called for me to return and talk. She caught up, running alongside me until she ran out of breath. She continued to plead, expressing that we needed to talk and that she loved me. She assured me that she wasn't doing this to hurt me and emphasized that there was still an us. She professed her love and pleaded for me to come back. She eventually gave up. I think she collapsed on the sidewalk, but I didn't glance back to confirm. I couldn't bear to look at her. She couldn't keep up with the pace I was setting. I could still complete a marathon in under 3 hours without breaking a sweat. Soon I was 2 blocks away, and she was nowhere in sight. Turning the corner, I accelerated, going into overdrive, as I called it. I was cruising. I could maintain this pace indefinitely, and perhaps I would. We had met in college. She was distributing cups of water to participants in a 10K event. I had won that race. Later, I joked with her that I had won because I was racing to find her before she slipped away. I caught her just in time, before she disappeared into the crowd of spectators. We hit it off instantly. She worked as a secretary to the dean of the business school. Despite not finishing college, she had secured a significant job due to her meticulous attention to detail and adeptness with written communication. I was a graduate student at the time, studying electronics and computer science. We dated for 6 months before becoming fornicators, and it was incredible. Despite being a maiden, she was exceptionally skilled in matters of closeness, and she thoroughly enjoyed it. At the time, it didn't occur to me, but she was naturally enthusiastic. There were signs. She just never fully embraced it. We married months after my graduation and 14 months after we first met. I was 26, and Ronnie was a year older at 27. Yes, I'll repeat it, she was still a maiden at 27. Cy and John Jr. arrived in the 9th and 10th years of our marriage, respectively, and we thrived. Ronnie continued as the dean's secretary, and I worked as a computer systems engineer for Peters Limited, a company involved in cutting-edge military research and development. My boss and the owner of Peters Limited was Bill Schuler, a 60-ish bachelor with an almost manic work ethic. Bill and I were not just boss and employee, we were close friends. Veronica and I had been married for about 17 years now, which I had believed to be wonderful. However, evidently, Veronica thought differently. Over the past few months, Ronnie had become somewhat distant, occasionally short-tempered with me, and less frequently with the children. This had led to a couple of heated arguments. While being short with me was one thing, I couldn't tolerate it when it came to the children. I considered that she might be going through menopause. I wasn't well versed in female biology, but I was aware of some things. I had intended to look into it more, but I never got around to it. Now as I walked, I wished I had. Veronica explained to Roberta that she didn't know where Bobby, her brother, was. She mentioned that he had left the house around 5 p.m. on Friday and hadn't been seen since. Expressing her worry and frantic state, Veronica sought guidance from Roberta, expressing concern about Bobby's whereabouts and asking for help. Roberta Mason could have been my wife's twin, and they had more than once been mistaken for sisters. Both had flowing red hair, curvaceous figures, and adorable freckles. Roberta was maybe an inch taller than Ronnie at 5 feet 7 inches, but otherwise they were near clones of each other. However, Bobby had a different personality. She was tough-minded, slow to speak, and less inclined to do so. Still single at age 40, no, she wasn't gay, but she preferred being independent. Roberta Mason inquired about JN, expressing surprise that he would behave in such a manner. Veronica shared that they had a disagreement, and John had walked out without talking. Bobby, concerned about the situation, reassured Veronica that Ronnie, presumably her husband, would find John. However, Bobby wanted to know the details of their argument, to which Veronica responded vaguely, stating it was personal and nothing that should have led John to leave. Roberta, a psychologist, commented on the situation, expressing her intention to find out more when they located John. She noted that Veronica had waited too long to call, hinting at sarcasm. Despite their good relationship, Roberta always felt that Veronica was a bit ditzy. Roberta then asked for details about John's departure, including the direction he headed, his clothing, and if he had taken a coat or his car. Veronica provided information about John going east toward Baxter, wearing a dark green t-shirt, jeans, and a Cubs baseball cap. She mentioned that he hadn't taken a coat or his car, expressing concern about the freezing weather. Roberta acknowledged the urgency of the situation and instructed Veronica to stay home and man the phone in case John called. She assured Veronica that she had her cell phone and would keep her informed as she set out to search for JN. The road was icy, so Roberta Mason drove under the speed limit. 10 miles out of town, her cell rang, prompting her to pull over to answer it. She learned that John was in Baxter and, expressing concern, decided to head there immediately before hanging up. In Baxter, a town of 150 with few residents, JN found himself indifferent to the place, enjoying a hot meal and warmth in his cell. The steel door at the end of the hall clanged open, and although John couldn't see who was coming, the footsteps signaled someone approaching. As the only prisoner, it had to be him. Upon arrival, Roberta questioned John, asking if he was proud of himself. He inquired if Veronica had called her, and Roberta confirmed, revealing that she had already been on the road looking for him. She expressed concern about his actions, pointing out that he had little ones and a worried wife at home. John sarcastically remarked that the kids might be worried, but Veronica wouldn't be. Roberta acknowledged that Veronica hadn't provided much detail, only mentioning a tiff and John leaving. John explained the disagreement, revealing Veronica's intention to be fornicating with other men, whether he liked it or not. Roberta's face remained composed as John elaborated on Veronica's plans. The guard sympathetically opened John's cell door, and they walked toward the front receiving area. John was informed that he had been bailed out but needed to return by Friday to plead. The jailer advised him to pay the fine and settle the damages for the bar fight, which involved broken chairs, a damaged table, and a broken mirror. JN agreed, acknowledging the logic of the advice. During the 2-hour-plus drive back, Roberta questioned John about the bar fight. After he shared his story, she remained silent for some time and then began her analysis. As Jay's sister, she considered herself his patient and insisted on helping him, noting that women go through changes men can't understand, attributing it to hormonal factors that can induce fear and insecurity. I conveyed to Bobby that I wasn't naive, emphasizing that other women don't engage with other men to improve their situations. I spoke with conviction, asserting my position. Bobby countered, sharing a statistic that 60% of men and 40% of women engage in extramarital affairs, contributing to the high divorce rate. She suggested that Veronica might be going through such a phase and needed my support. As I started to respond, she raised her hands to stop me. She clarified that she wasn't advocating for letting Veronica be fornicating with other men. Instead, she urged me to talk to her, hold her hand, and guide her through this challenging period. Bobby emphasized that Veronica needed my strength and support. I expressed my willingness to do anything to help Veronica, with the condition that if she allowed another man to be fornicating with her, our relationship would be over without any exceptions. I made it clear that if she disrespected me in that way, I would do my best to bring consequences to both her and her lover, or lovers. Bobby fell silent again, and I felt uneasy, perceiving her thoughtfulness as judgment. The conversation then shifted to lighter topics. Observing my accomplishment of walking 100 miles in 2 days, Bobby acknowledged it. I downplayed it, saying it was something I could do and needed the time for introspection, dismissing it as nothing significant. It was a hell of a feat, especially given the temperatures and road conditions at this time of year. "What were you thinking?" she said. She meant how I could not have thought about the conditions of the weather and the roads, but I extrapolated her words to mean my thoughts about Veronica, myself, and our marriage. Christmas was 3 weeks away, shaping up to be quite the holiday. What awaited me under the yet-to-be-put-up tree? Perhaps a used contraceptive bearing someone else's seed. I felt furious and couldn't bring myself to go home just yet. I instructed Bobby to drop me at Peter's, explaining that it was Sunday, and I needed to be alone for a while. I suggested that she could go there tomorrow and inform Veronica about my need for solitude. Bobby expressed her understanding and mentioned that she would talk to Veronica, who was quite worried about me. She speculated that Veronica might reconsider her plans, if any, now that she was aware of my feelings. I assured Bobby that I wouldn't do anything rash and just needed more time to think. After dropping me off, I watched Roberta drive away before entering my office. Although she believed Veronica might postpone her plans, I couldn't shake the concern that she might have already acted on them. Reflecting on the loss of trust in my wife, I considered it a significant and troubling situation. "He's afraid he's lost you," Roberta commented upon entering, shrugging off her coat without a greeting. Veronica dismissed the notion, stating that she had told me I would never lose her. Roberta challenged her, emphasizing that when she mentioned making love to other men, any man would be thinking what I was thinking. Veronica, looking troubled, asked if I had told Roberta. Roberta confirmed, stating that she was my sister and that secrets like that couldn't be kept for long. Veronica defended her desire to explore, framing it as something she had always wanted to know about and considered okay to do. Roberta issued a warning, stating that if Veronica went through with it, she would lose me, our children, and most of the friends and relatives who loved her. She emphasized the gravity of the situation, questioning if Veronica realized the consequences. Veronica couldn't meet Roberta's eyes as she explained her need, hoping that Roberta would understand. She revealed that it had consumed her for a long time, expressing uncertainty about being able to help herself. Veronica emphasized that John had always understood her and needed him to do so again. She acknowledged that she couldn't live without him but was unsure if she could refrain from acting on her desires with someone else. Expressing the real danger of outright cheating, Veronica admitted that the overpowering feeling and need inside her were challenging to resist. Roberta, in response, shared her perspective, stating that she could relate to such overpowering feelings. She explained that despite loving men and not being gay, she chose not to marry because she knew she couldn't remain faithful to one man. She cautioned Veronica about the potential consequences of her proposal, emphasizing the risk of losing everything if she didn't clean up her act soon. Veronica conceded that Roberta might be right, and she started to sob. Roberta comforted her, assuring her that everything would be all right. She offered to stay with Veronica for the night and promised to be there the next day when John returned, ready to referee the situation. Roberta expressed gratitude for Veronica's acknowledgement and advised her to give up the idea of being with other men. She emphasized the importance of convincing her husband that he had nothing to fear, recognizing it as a challenging task. Veronica nodded, allowing herself a small smile, though Roberta missed the slight narrowing of her eyes in response to the last words. Realizing that obtaining her husband's approval was unrealistic, Veronica faced a decision: either abandon her plans entirely or persuade her husband otherwise. These were two distinct choices, but her priority was winning him back, as her love for him remained undeniably true. For the first time since his abrupt departure, Veronica felt a sense of clarity. Answers were within reach. She would soon find out. The following morning, I woke up on the office couch feeling a bit stiff. The lengthy walk and less than ideal sleeping conditions had taken a toll. While I was accustomed to marathon distances for time, military-style endurance walks were a rarity for me, especially in the last decade. Yet I was somewhat proud that I hadn't lost my touch, not yet. I parked in front of the house a little after 10 a.m., knowing C.A. and John Jr. would be at school. Veronica opened the door, embracing me tightly. Her relief at my return was palpable. My wife expressed relief, assuring me that she was no longer worried, and asked me to forget everything she had said earlier. She admitted to being an idiot and mentioned having a conversation with Bobby, who helped her understand. I remained cautious, my suspicion lingering as she seemed to have abandoned something she adamantly refused to discuss just a few days prior. I acknowledged her statement with a guarded response, hoping she meant it. Entering the kitchen, I noticed Bobby sitting at the table, sipping her tea. I greeted her and questioned if she was there to support my wife's story. Bobby confirmed that they had talked extensively and expressed hope that we could get through the situation, describing it as a dumb female head trip. Despite the reassurances, something felt off, and I found myself in quite a predicament, lacking trust in my wife. I nodded, hesitant to take anything for granted. Despite Bobby's insight, she hadn't witnessed or heard Veronica like I had during the Friday confrontation. Over the next few days, Veronica worked hard to reassure me. I was almost starting to buy into Bobby's explanation of a dumb female head trip. Then came Thursday, a peculiar phone call with background noises. I didn't mention it to Veronica, but figured out the words "call cell, call my cell." Upstairs, I found her cell on the dresser, checked the call history, noted 6 unknown numbers, and felt lucky. With my military background, I knew uncovering the identities behind those numbers would be easy. Illegal? Yes, but my boss had used his clearance for a similar situation. It had been a year. Now it was my turn. This wasn't a no-fault state. If I caught her with evidence, she was mine. Feeling confident that night, the lovemaking was more than good. She had certainly turned things around in the past 6 days. I hoped I wouldn't have to give it up anytime soon. Arriving early in the lab, I aimed to catch Tim before he headed into the field. Tim, our systems installer and field techie, shared a camaraderie with me fueled by numerous brews as we cheered for our alma mater, Ohio State. I called out to Tim as he passed by, asking if he had a minute. He halted on his way out and agreed to come into my office when I mentioned having a problem and needing his help. In my office, Tim settled into a chair and I took a seat beside him. I brought up the incident from last year when Mr. Peters had him do some snooping. Tim became suddenly attentive, expressing concern about my involvement in a similar matter. I explained that I had reasons to be concerned and asked if he could assist me. Tim agreed to help but warned of the risks, emphasizing that I should be certain. I nodded and assured him that if I had anything, I would contact him, requesting that he not discuss it, even with me. He agreed, suggesting that I do some spot checking over the next month and then get back to him. I handed him some phone numbers pulled from my wife's cell, admitting that I didn't know them and that it might be nothing. But it could also be significant. Tim acknowledged that it was a good place to start and noted that it wasn't illegal if my name was on the account, which I confirmed. Reflecting on my wife's actions, I recognized that she had underestimated my tech savviness and connections in the field. If she intended to cheat, her chances of escaping were slim unless she could completely allay my suspicions. It seemed like a precarious strategy, but perhaps her only option. Life settled at home with content kids, a happy Veronica, and me feigning happiness. A week later, Tim asked for a meeting at our usual spot and disclosed that he had checked out the numbers, obtained addresses, and caught Veronica at 2 of them on successive days with pictures, film, and audio evidence. I was informed that my wife was definitely cheating on me, to which I responded nonchalantly, requesting more evidence, especially additional film. I had plans to take her down along with her lovers. Tim expressed concern, suggesting that Veronica might be running some kind of sting. But I assured him that I wouldn't be using the gathered evidence in court and had another purpose in mind. Tim, enjoying the espionage aspect, agreed to get more evidence. After 3 weeks, armed with extensive information about the individuals involved, I marveled at the depth of Tim's investigation. It was now a matter of choosing the right time and battleground. I needed to speak with Bobby, and together we watched the gathered evidence in her office. My sister expressed disbelief and irritation, acknowledging that Veronica had even fooled her, Reflecting on the situation, I shared my frustration about feeling deceived and getting sloppy seconds at times. Bobby advised against seeking revenge, emphasizing that it would only eat at me in the aftermath and that our kids would eventually make judgments about both of us. Despite mental torment, I acknowledged her wisdom and decided overt revenge against Veronica was off the table. However, I contemplated retaliating against her lovers, believing that if executed properly, it would make her incredibly unpopular in no time. As it turned out, she had 5 lovers, not 6. The additional number I obtained was a wrong dial to her cell. 4 of her liaisons were married, all with underage children. 2 were individuals whose careers I could significantly jeopardize with minimal effort, one state politician, the other a priest. Veronica had ventured into deep trouble. The influence of a woman's closeness drive had undeniably corrupted her. My sister's choice to remain single for so long suddenly made sense. Veronica would have been better off doing the same. My primary concern was for the children of the cheaters, and of course, my own. Mine would stay with me, there would be no compromise. While Veronica would have open-ended visitation, no boyfriends would be allowed near them. Otherwise, I would grant her the house but claim everything else, relocating myself and the children to a lovely 3-bedroom condo near their new elementary school. It was time for war. A tech-savvy friend blurred my wife's face in 5 damning videos and crafted copies for the wives and significant others of the 5 individuals. 2 additional copies were sent to a carefully chosen TV station to expose the priest. I contemplated suing the culprits, but that would have left Veronica vulnerable in court, and I needed to safeguard her to some extent for the sake of my children. I was partially heeding Bobby's advice. The thought occurred to me that technology might eventually put an end to extramarital affairs. It was becoming too easy to expose these individuals. On D-Day, I went to work early, staring at my computer set up and ready. One double click, and 4 husbands would likely become ex-husbands, while another would find himself singing hymns at a remote monastery. I double-clicked. Hell would soon break loose. I smiled, feeling like Joshua at the walls of Jericho, anticipating the walls tumbling down. I informed my section boss that I was taking the rest of the day off and went home. I wondered how long it would take for Veronica to receive the news, or if she would at all. Just in case, I loaded one of the videos into the player and turned on the TV. One button push, and she would witness herself in provocative film clips, signaling the end of many things, including our marriage. I went upstairs for a nap and had an idea. I returned to the phone, grabbed the pad, and wrote a note. Play video. An hour later, I heard her car in the garage door. She was home. Waiting at the top of the stairs, mostly out of sight, I saw her pause in front of the TV, reading the note on the tape. She approached the player and pressed start. I could sense her nervousness, although I couldn't see the video. No more than a minute into it, she fainted. The video continued playing. I descended and turned off the machine. She regained consciousness about half an hour later. I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come to. She spotted me. She groggily asked if I hated her, to which I replied affirmatively, stating there was no chance for reconciliation. Offering her the house and allowing the kids to live with her, I asserted my ownership of everything else: stocks, bonds, savings. I presented the option of preserving a bit of her self-respect if she didn't fight me, but warned of ruining her if she chose to resist. Expressing remorse, Veronica explained that she felt compelled to take certain actions. Despite her apology, I deemed her actions unforgivable and warned her that the consequences had caught up with her. The men were in the process of being ruined, and I advised her not to answer her cell anytime soon. Anticipating she wouldn't be welcome around the kids, I informed her that I had already leased a place and that Bobby would take the children there after school. Although she would have visitation rights, I made it clear that none of her male friends were welcome. She nodded in understanding. To her credit, she hadn't started crying or making excuses. Anticipating the tears would come about 2 minutes after I left, I proceeded to leave. Now, all the married individuals were divorced by their wives and taken to the cleaners. The priest was reassigned, but I never found out where. The politician is now selling used cars. Maybe Veronica still works for the dean and sees the children often. It was challenging to help them understand why Mommy no longer lived with us, but somehow, we got through it. Veronica occasionally dates. Some office friends may set her up, but that's just speculation. I know for a fact that the idea of promiscuity no longer appeals to her. She'll be with us at Christmas. She's still family, but she acknowledges she made a significant mistake and has the decency not to push it with me. Lovemaking, 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 it can be such a destroyer. Second story, I've been married to my wife for 4 years, having dated for 2 before getting married. Although we are still relatively new to marriage, our relationship seemed robust, with no signs of trouble. Our love was genuine, and we built a foundation of trust during our courtship. I'm 30, and she's 26. The incident that exposed my wife's infidelity happened on July 4th, during a party organized by her friend. Let me provide some context before discussing the incident itself. About a week before July 4th, my wife mentioned her friend's July 4th celebration. We usually have a reliable babysitter for our 3-year-old. We usually inform the sitter in advance about our babysitting needs. For this specific July 4th event, my wife informed me that she had contacted the babysitter, who mentioned her schedule would be packed and she couldn't make it. I was disappointed because spending time with my wife had become rarer since we had our baby. Despite my reservations about her friend, my wife expressed a strong desire to attend the event and suggested I stay home with our child while she goes to her friend's party. Wanting her to have fun, I agreed, saying I would take care of our child at home. Here's the twist. My wife knew I wasn't a big fan of her friend, who is still single and 3 years younger, a bit more carefree. I didn't want to come across as controlling, advising her to watch out for her friend, as she might not be the best influence. On the morning of July 4th, I took an unusual step and decided to call the babysitter myself. Normally, my wife handles these arrangements, and I had to find the sitter's number on her phone. I thought offering the babysitter a higher hourly rate might change her mind. If it worked out, I planned to surprise my wife and let her know we could go to the event together after all. I wanted to share the news once I had the babysitter situation sorted out and enjoy the satisfaction of pulling off a last-minute miracle. Things started to unravel when I called the babysitter and asked her to reconsider sitting for my son that evening. Even though she had initially declined, she appeared surprised when I used the word reconsider and told me it was the first time I had asked her about that day. Her surprise caught me off guard, and I inquired if she remembered my wife calling her to arrange the evening a week earlier. She confirmed she hadn't received any call from my wife. I quickly improvised, telling her that my wife had actually called a family member instead. It became clear that my wife had lied for some reason, though I couldn't figure out why. Causing concern, I arranged for the sitter to come to our house at 10 p.m., and my wife mentioned she would be leaving around 8 p.m. for the event. Before ending the call with the sitter, I made sure to tell her not to inform my wife about her coming over. I explained that I wanted to surprise my wife and keep the outing I had planned a secret. I almost stumbled over my words when the sitter reminded me that I had mentioned my wife's earlier attempt to secure the date and time. I managed to cover it up by saying that we both thought the date night might have been canceled, but since she was on board, it would still be a nice surprise. As planned, my wife left around 8 p.m. I patiently waited for the sitter, who arrived on time. Once she was there, I headed to the party my wife had mentioned. Honestly, I had a suspicion that she might not show up and go somewhere else instead, but to my surprise, she was indeed at the party. Her friend greeted me upon my arrival, and seeing me there surprised her. She quickly called my wife over. It's an understatement to say she was just shocked. Her reaction was more like utter disbelief. It had only been around 3 hours since my wife left home, but she already seemed quite intoxicated. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her reception toward me was chilly. She repeatedly asked why I was there and who was taking care of our child. I reassured her that I had the babysitter situation under control, and she shouldn't worry. I just wanted us to enjoy the evening together and watch the fireworks display. The party, in a medium-sized setting with maybe 15-20 people, had a noticeable gender ratio, more guys than girls, almost like a 2-1 ratio. We managed to move past the awkward initial interaction, but that still didn't explain why my wife had been deceptive about the outing. The event seemed to revolve around a game night, with a focus on playing truth or dare games. I overheard one of the guys suggesting they get back to the game. I decided it was time to catch up on what I had missed and joined a friendly group of guys, the ones quite talkative due to the flowing drinks or their outgoing personalities. Amidst the gathering, my wife's behavior became agitated and uneasy, and she expressed her desire to leave and go home. Her sudden request to leave raised a red flag for me, suggesting that she was definitely hiding something. I assured her we could head home, but I asked for a moment to try some drinks since I had just arrived. I headed to the kitchen and struck up a conversation with one of the guys there. After introducing myself to a random guy, I inquired if he was enjoying the party. He introduced himself as well and confirmed that he was indeed having a good time. I told him I was interested in making a move on one of the girls at the party, but I wasn't sure who was available. I began pointing to the different girls one by one, and he helped me identify who was already in a relationship and who seemed open to approach. Using this approach, I eventually pointed to my wife without revealing her identity to the stranger. I then asked him what he thought about her. He mentioned that my wife was attractive, but he warned me that she was off limits because she arrived with the guy he knew as a friend. I pretended to be interested and asked him to share more details about this guy. The stranger went on to give me information about my wife's affair partner, explaining that they had met at a concert and had been involved with each other fornicating ever since. This revelation really hit me hard. The timeline of when my wife attended the concert and met this guy matched up perfectly. This struck a chord because I was also present at that very same concert. What bothered me was the fact that I was with her most of the time during the event, except when she wanted to get some snacks and insisted on going alone. I recall that it took her an unusually long time to return with her snacks, but I brushed it off, assuming there was a long line or she needed to use the restroom. This incident occurred about a month ago, and since then, she has been frequently leaving the house and even had a trip out of town. This new revelation left me questioning everything. The stranger was boasting about my wife as if she were some kind of prize he had won for his friend. He kept on talking, sharing a few more details. He explained that he had come to the party to pursue my wife's friend. When he described her as a free spirit, I wasn't sure if my reaction was noticeable, but I couldn't fake it anymore. Just then, my wife's friend joined the conversation, possibly realizing that my questions were leading to the truth about my wife's affair. However, it was too late, and I could tell that she was also part of the deception. I excused myself from the conversation, but asked my wife's friend about my wife's whereabouts. She suggested checking the patio, and that's where I found my wife talking to the guy. It seemed like they were either having a heated discussion or she was trying to convince him of something. I approached them and introduced myself to the man who was involved with my wife, but before I could say anything to him, my wife hastily pulled me away, insisting that we should leave the party. I swatted her hand away with anger and told her she could leave because I wanted to have a talk with the man. I confronted him directly, introducing myself as her husband. I asked him straightforwardly if he knew my wife was married before getting involved with her. Considering I had already discovered the truth about their relationship, I have a somewhat imposing presence that I use to my advantage in confrontations. Honestly, I wasn't looking to fight him if he genuinely didn't know she was married. My little show of subtle aggression was meant to let my wife know that I had uncovered her infidelity and to unsettle the guy a bit. I repeated my question to him, making it clear that I didn't want to ruin the party by starting a brawl, but I needed to know if he was aware of my wife's marital status before getting involved with her. My wife was getting anxious and tried to hold me back while apologizing. The guy, seeing the bottle in my hand and realizing he was cornered on the patio with no support, fell for my act and started apologizing as well. He mentioned that he didn't intend to cause any trouble, and that he had only started talking to my wife without knowing she was married. I inquired about the number of times they had been together, and he gave a response. I simply wished him a good night and walked away. I hopped in my car and drove back home. I told my wife that I wanted a divorce. I checked into a hotel where I'm writing down my story as a form of self-therapy. I'm feeling lost about what steps to take. This is my first experience with divorce, and I'm completely unfamiliar with co-parenting since I didn't grow up in a household like that. What I do know is that I can't bear the thought of seeing that woman, and this incident is making me physically sick.
Story 2.
The alarm sounded at its usual time, 6 a.m., and my wife, Anita, and I rose to begin our day. As I sat up on the edge of the bed and swung my feet to the floor, an audible groan escaped me. "What's the matter? You sound like an old man," she teased on her way to the bathroom. Feeling like an old man after the events of the previous night, I heard her laughter echoing from the bathroom as I reminisced about our passionate lovemaking. The evening had concluded with a particularly sensual act. Today marked the beginning of her week-long business trip, leaving me alone at home, a prospect I wasn't eagerly anticipating. The sound of the shower running tempted me to join her, but the memories of the previous night's exertions convinced me otherwise. When she returned to the bedroom, her mood was upbeat, contrasting with my self-pitying state. She encouraged me to rise and start the day, saying, "Come on, old man, get up and get going. We need 2 breadwinners to pay the mortgage on this place." With a nod, I replied, "All right, I'm moving," and stumbled into the bathroom to begin my morning routine. Later, we gathered downstairs for breakfast before she departed for the airport, and I made my way to work. Anita, an attorney, and I both worked at a medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. She specialized in negotiations and traveled with teams off-plant. This trip involved negotiating a new subcontract with a major aerospace firm in Denver. She traveled several times a year for similar negotiations, typically gone at least a week each time. At 35, she had graduated cum laude from the State University 12 years ago, standing at 5 feet 4 inches, weighing 125 pounds, with measurements of 34-24-35. I'm Jack Fillmore, 37, working as an engineer in the same company as my wife. Standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 165 pounds, I work out to stay in shape. We both enjoyed playing golf and often formed a foursome with friends. We met at a company picnic, and it was love at first sight for me. It seemed the same for her, as after a whirlwind courtship, we got married 6 months later. We've been married for 7 years now and just bought the house we're living in. 3 months ago, it was the home where we planned to start our family, and Anita was going off her birth control pills upon her return from this trip. We were thrilled about having a family, and she intended to be a stay-at-home mom until the kids started school. Our parents, living in the area, were also anticipating our family expansion. After breakfast, I loaded Anita's travel bag into her car and gave her a goodbye kiss. Tears welled up in her eyes as she got into her car to leave. I expressed my hope that soon I wouldn't be traveling, so we wouldn't have to go through these goodbyes. She shared her dislike for goodbyes, and I reassured her that I felt the same way. I mentioned that I would see her on Friday evening, and we could have takeout so she could rest. She agreed, saying, "Sounds good, bye." I observed as she backed out of the garage and into the street. Waving as she left, I trudged into the house to complete my preparations for leaving for the office. Arriving at the workplace, I ascended to the engineering department, grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room, and headed to my desk. Barely settling in, my phone rang. I identified myself to the caller as Fillmore. My boss, Evan, asked me to come into his office. I agreed, picked up my coffee, and made my way to his office. Evan mentioned that he recalled me mentioning last Friday that Anita would be traveling this week. He then presented an opportunity. Gil Hawkins, our field service engineer in California, was sick and unable to handle a problem a customer in San Jose was having with one of our models. Given my experience with that model, Evan asked if I would like to head out to San Jose and check it out. I agreed, stating that there wasn't much happening at the office, and I was batching it this week. Evan instructed me to get Kathy to arrange my reservations and tickets, and to call the customer to let them know I was coming and find out the problem. Feeling more enthusiastic about life, I stopped by Evan's secretary Kathy's desk and informed her about my flight and reservation needs. Later, I called the customer from my desk to understand their problem before heading home to pack. On the way home, a plan formed in my mind. If I finished quickly, I could surprise my wife with a stop in Denver on my way home. The thought of spending a couple of days with her in Denver was becoming increasingly exciting. While waiting for my flight at the airport, I attempted to call Anita's cell phone, but she didn't answer. So I left a voicemail indicating I'd be staying at my folks for a couple of days and to reach me on my cell during the evenings. Everything worked out fine. I was at the customer's location Tuesday morning, made the necessary equipment adjustments, and had it checked out and running satisfactorily by the afternoon. Returning to my hotel, I called the airline and secured a flight that would get me to Denver at 9 p.m. Mountain Time. Checking out of the hotel in San Jose, I headed to the airport in San Francisco, where I had dinner. While eating, Anita called me on my cell, and we chatted for a few minutes. She inquired about my folks, and I responded as though I were at their house. She mentioned that negotiations were progressing, but she was tired and planned a quiet evening in her hotel room. We bid our goodbyes with expressions of love, and after eating, I boarded my 9:45 p.m. flight. I checked in at the desk at Anita's suite hotel, and after verifying my identity, they provided me with a card for entry to her suite. Entering her suite quietly, I noticed a lamp illuminating the computer table, and her laptop was on it, closed. However, there was no sign of Anita. I placed my suitcase down and checked the bedroom and bathroom, finding them empty. I thought to myself that she probably hadn't returned to her room yet. I decided to sit down and wait, or perhaps go down and check the lounge to see if she was there. I then observed that the door to the adjacent room was slightly open. Approaching it, the door swung open silently on well-lubricated hinges. Surveying the living room and the adjoining suite, I found no one. Perplexed, I entered the room and suddenly heard a groan emanating from the bedroom. My gut tightened, and I broke into a sweat as I quietly approached the bedroom door. Although my heart may not have ceased, my breath certainly did. Witnessing the scene in the dimly lit room, Anita was unclothed, facing me, engaged with a man whose face remained unseen. My initial urge was to burst in, confront her, and confront the man. but reason prevailed over my emotions. Slowly backing away from the door, I returned to her suite. Retrieving the digital camera from my travel bag, brought along for souvenir pictures, I returned to the other bedroom door. Turning off the flash and adjusting the camera for dim light photos, I calmly captured several images of the bed scene without their awareness. They were so engrossed in their activities that their eyes remained closed, oblivious to their surroundings. Before heading back to her suite, I examined an open briefcase on the table, finding a business card with the name Sam Harris, the chief negotiator for our company. I pocketed the card. Back in her suite, I utilized a camera-computer interface cable I had with me to connect the camera to her laptop. Since our laptops had the same photo program, I easily downloaded a picture from my camera and set it as her desktop background. I then packed my camera into my travel bag and left her suite quietly. Before departing, I heard her cry out in climax. I nearly broke down right there, but pressed on towards the elevator. After returning the entry card to the desk, I contacted the airline to inquire about the next flight back to St. Louis. Luckily, a 6:30 a.m. flight was available, promising a 9:30 a.m. arrival home. With some luck, I calculated this would coincide with the time Anita would be opening her laptop at the negotiating table. She would then realize she had been caught, signaling the end of our marriage. Returning to the airport, I checked into a nearby motel where sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the distressing scene from her hotel bedroom. I wept, allowing my pain to manifest in tears. By the time I left the motel at 5 a.m., I had exhausted my tears, resolved to conclude our marriage swiftly. Upon arriving in St. Louis, my cell phone began to ring. As I entered my car and checked the caller, I saw it was Anita. I turned it off and headed home. Upon entering the house, the phone was ringing, but checking the caller ID revealed it was Anita again. Letting it go to the answering machine, I heard her sobbing on the phone. She pleaded with me to call her right away, expressing that she needed to talk with me and it was important. I ignored her tearful plea, changed my clothes, rented a U-Haul, and returned home to start packing. If my calculations were correct, she would arrive around 4 p.m., and I aimed to be out of the house by then. It took a couple of hours, but I successfully moved all my personal belongings to a rental storage unit. Before packing, I contacted our lawyer and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. After unloading my belongings at the storage unit, I met with our lawyer and requested the initiation of divorce proceedings. While tempted to cite infidelity as the cause, I opted for incompatibility, reserving the infidelity accusation in case she contested the divorce. I also requested him to draft a new will designating my brother as a beneficiary. Making a stop at the bank, I moved half of our savings and checking balance to new accounts solely in my name. Subsequently, I contacted my investment advisor to perform a similar transfer for our accounts with him. With a heavy heart, I drove to my parents' house, carrying my suitcase with me. I entered through the open door, and my mother, spotting me first, exclaimed loudly, "Jack, where have you been? Anita has been calling here several times looking for you. Did you inform her that you were staying here?" My retired father joined us, and I sat down to explain everything to them. They were astonished when I revealed Anita's infidelity and the end of our marriage. I inquired if I could stay with them for a few days until I found a furnished apartment, and they agreed. My calculations seemed fairly accurate because around 6 p.m., as we were sitting down to eat, the doorbell rang. My dad answered it, and a moment later, he returned with Anita, looking visibly distressed. She questioned why I hadn't answered her calls, expressing the need to talk. She noted that I had moved all my stuff out of the house and assumed the message left on my desktop would provide the necessary information. I responded, expressing my fear that it was her and suggesting that we go somewhere to talk. I firmly stated that I was no longer her sweetheart and had nothing to discuss. Divorce proceedings had already begun, and anything that needed to be conveyed could go through our lawyers. I explained that what I witnessed in Denver had destroyed any feelings I had for her and requested her to leave so I could finish my dinner. She pleaded, and I reiterated that there was nothing to talk about without addressing the infidelity. I mentioned having pictures and that I planned to confront her lover, Sam, the following day. She tearfully insisted on talking. I responded, suggesting that she leave as my dinner was getting cold. I proposed that she write me a letter, articulating how she could rationalize breaking her wedding vows. I assumed that, as a smart lawyer, she could explain how it was all my fault and that she could still love and respect me very much. With a sob, she turned away. Before reaching the door, she turned back and pleaded again. I said goodbye, and after she left, still crying, my parents remained stunned. My mom commented on the harshness of my response. I retorted, sharing the harsh reality of her actions and my inability to trust her again. I questioned whether she wanted me to give her grandchildren from a woman like that. My dad suggested that with time, my perspective might change. I replied, expressing doubt, and suggesting we talk about something else so I could digest my food.
That Monday morning when I left home, I was feeling sorry for myself having to leave Jack. But I thought how wonderful it would be when I got back, and we could start our family. We'd waited this long to make sure we were set financially and career-wise to begin being parents. Now everything was almost in place. The journey to Denver was uneventful. I sat next to Sam Harris, our chief negotiator, and we briefly discussed the upcoming negotiations and our families. Sam, who had been married for 20 years with 2 high school-age children, knew that I planned to quit work upon pregnancy, and he expressed that he would miss me. Sam and I, a negotiating team since before my marriage, had a comfortable rapport. The other 2 team members conversed behind us. Upon reaching the Denver hotel, we checked into our rooms, with Sam and I opting for adjoining rooms as usual. Originally intended for late-night strategy sessions, this arrangement evolved about 10 years ago when our relationship took a physical turn. We convinced ourselves that it was a stress relief mechanism after challenging negotiations, and at the time, we considered it not cheating on his wife if it contributed to our professional collaboration. After Jack and I got married, I refrained for a couple of years due to guilt. However, during an especially demanding negotiation, Sam proposed resuming our arrangement to relieve stress, and I reluctantly agreed. It became a habit again, with the thrill of secrecy boosting my libido at home, benefiting Jack and lessening my guilt. On the first night of this trip, we didn't meet as I felt tired after dinner. However, after the initial day of negotiations, I agreed to meet him the following night. The next morning, upon opening my laptop, I was shocked by what I saw on the screen. Sam, sitting next to me, quickly closed the lid, and we took the laptop to the hallway. He was furious, demanding to know what kind of content I had on my desktop. I responded that I didn't know and explained that it wasn't there the last time I used it. Still in shock, I suggested checking it again. Upon reopening it, we both looked at the picture, and Sam exclaimed that it was me. I questioned how it could be me, but he insisted, adding that it was probably him under me, although my face couldn't be seen. I asked if he had left the laptop unattended at any point the previous day. He denied it, saying that it was with him during the trip and in his suite while he was in mine. I wondered if anyone could have accessed my room with a camera, but he didn't think so, stating that the door was closed and he assumed it was locked. I advised him to get back to the hotel and check if anyone had been given access to his room the previous night. I assured him that I would handle things on my end and asked him to reach Jack to find out where he was last night. He expressed doubt, saying it couldn't have been Jack as he spoke with him at his folks' place. I asked if he had called Jack on his parents' phone, to which he replied that Jack had asked him to call on his cell phone. Worried about the situation, I mentioned that I didn't like the sound of it, as Jack could have been anywhere during their conversation. I instructed him to call me on my cell if he found out anything, and urged him to do whatever he could to manage the fallout from this. I told him to take a cab back to the hotel and said goodbye. Feeling anxious, I considered the possibility that Jack had taken the picture and placed it on my laptop. It seemed like a message that our marriage was over. I needed to return to the hotel to gather information. The receptionist arranged a cab, and 15 minutes later I was back, checking the front desk to see if anyone accessed my suite. The clerk confirmed that a Mr. Jack Fillmore received a card at 9:45 the previous evening, returned half an hour later. At that moment, I knew my marriage was likely over. The man I loved more than anything had disappeared. Despite the heartbreak, I felt compelled to fight for him. Entering my suite, I immediately tried to reach him on his cell and at work. No answer on his cell, it had been turned off. Leaving an important voice message, he called me back soon. His work secretary informed me he was on a business trip to California, expected back tomorrow. That was it. He had gone to California and stopped on his way back to surprise me. I guess we were both surprised. Calling his folks, they hadn't seen him for several days. I asked them to have him call me. No answer at home, but I left a message there too. Alone in the suite, I cried, realizing I had no way to talk to him unless I went home. So I picked up the phone, made reservations for the next flight to St. Louis, and after packing, I informed Sam of the situation. He was quiet before speaking. Sam mentioned that it seemed we were both facing divorce or worse. He pointed out the company's policy against managerial employees fraternizing, highlighting the potential risk of both of us being fired, which would not look good on our records. He expressed concern about losing Jack and acknowledged that losing his family would be bad too. He advised me to get back to St. Louis and find Jack, urging me to see if he would listen to reason. He informed me that he had made reservations for a flight leaving at noon, scheduled to be back by 4:30. For his sake, he emphasized the importance of finding Jack and talking to him. Sam mentioned that he would let me know how it goes, and explained that he had to stay there until negotiations were finished. He assured me that he would be waiting to hear from me. We said our goodbyes. Picking up my bag and laptop, I hurried down to the lobby, checked out, and took the hotel limo to the airport. Praying all the way back to St. Louis, I hoped to get Jack to talk to me. I had to explain it was just closeness and did not affect him at all. I had to stake everything on the hope that he could be unemotional about my infidelity and accept it for what it was. Nothing but meaningless closeness. Arriving back home, nothing seemed out of place at first. However, entering our bedroom and finding all his belongings gone made me realize he knew and had left me. I had to find him. After many fruitless phone calls, I decided to go to his folks' house to see if he was there or if they had an idea where he was. He was at his folks', and the reception I received from him made me nauseous in its unfeeling brutality. He informed me he was in the process of filing for divorce, had no desire to talk, and nothing I could say would change his mind. After sarcastically suggesting I write a long letter explaining my position, I left and sat in my car, crying. The family we had planned would never happen. Growing old together and enjoying grandchildren together felt like an unattainable dream. From a selfish viewpoint, what grieved me even more was the thought that by the time I found another husband, I might be too old to conceive.
Eventually, I started the car and returned to our vacant house. Following a restless night haunted by visions of Anita and Sam together, I rose early and descended to my folks' home, brewing coffee. Retrieving my laptop and camera, I proceeded to download the camera pictures into the computer, aiming to identify Sam. Examining the pictures, Sam's face remained unclear. However, I noticed something on his right arm reaching towards Anita's chest. Upon closer inspection, I identified a tattoo, a heart with the word Marie on it. Sam's wife was Marie. That's all I needed. I returned upstairs, showered, and prepared for work. When I came back down, my mother was up, preparing breakfast. Later at work, I burned a couple of CDs with the pictures I had taken and a blow-up of Sam's tattoo. I printed several sets and organized them in a folder before walking to our human resources department. I requested to see the manager, Phil, whom I knew from golf outings. Placing a set of pictures in front of him, I explained that the images might appear inappropriate, but they depicted my wife and Sam Harris. The date and time on them confirmed they were taken Tuesday evening in Sam's hotel suite in Denver during a company negotiation trip. Phil seemed visibly shocked and inquired about what he could do. I responded, suggesting that he could terminate both of them for cause under the anti-fraternization clause in their contract with the company. I pointed out that this clause had never been enforced before and questioned whether he was sure about pursuing this course of action. I mentioned that it would bring the affair out in the open and assumed that he was considering divorcing Anita over the matter. I informed him that I already had my lawyer drawing up the papers, but if he chose not to pursue it, I would bring suit against the company. Phil agreed, stating that he would take the matter to the legal department and get the ball rolling. He then prompted me to continue with the next point of discussion. I went in to see my boss, Evan, to inform him about the situation. He was appropriately horrified at what I had to tell him about my wife and Sam Harris when I requested the rest of the week off as vacation time, and he readily agreed. In parting, he congratulated me on a job well done. During my trip to California, the customer praised the quick resolution of their problem and requested if I would consider taking over the California territory, given the current field engineer's retirement due to ill health. I mentioned that I'd consider it and provide an answer upon my return to work the following week. On my way out of Evan's office, Kathy, his secretary, informed me that my wife had been looking for me and would return later. I instructed Kathy not to let my wife see me under any circumstances and expressed that there was a significant problem as we were getting divorced and she and Sam Harris were involved. I anticipated the news spreading throughout the plant by noon, considering Kathy's inclination for gossip. Returning to my desk, I called Marie Harris, Sam's wife, whom I knew from company picnics. I was aware that my revelations about our spouses could be challenging for her. I contacted Marie and explained the situation, expressing the need to talk as soon as possible. She agreed to meet and provided her address, and I agreed to visit her in 15 minutes. Upon arriving at the Harrises, I felt a sense of dread about disclosing the situation to Marie and her family. However, I believed Sam should face consequences and Anita should not bear the entire fallout. Marie greeted me, offering coffee, which I accepted. I decided to get straight to the point. I disclosed the affair between Sam and Anita, my pursuit of a divorce from Anita, and my decision to have them both fired from their jobs. I mentioned that the information would soon become public knowledge and offered to show her photos as evidence. Observing her face, I was surprised at the lack of a significant reaction. Marie shared that she had suspected Sam's infidelity during company trips for years, but hoped it wasn't true. She acknowledged Sam's previous role as a loving husband and father. Marie expressed regret for both my marriage and her own situation. She considered the possibility of Sam being fired and the challenges he might face finding another well-paying job. She concluded by offering me a set of photographs if I wanted them. Marie expressed gratitude for sharing the photographs, stating that she would leave them for her to look at later when she could gather the strength. I apologized, explaining that I couldn't let the situation go, especially considering Anita and I were on the verge of starting a family. I emphasized the importance of trust and respect in a relationship, qualities I believe the mother of our children should possess. She acknowledged my decision and thanked me for informing her directly, expressing understanding about not wanting to hear it from other sources first. Marie extended her sympathy for my situation with Anita, anticipating her devastation and remorse when she found out about the affair. She wished it were a one-time incident, finding it easier to forgive, but believed it had been ongoing for years, making it harder to accept now that it was out in the open. Marie emphasized her pride and the need to hold her head up. I assured her that if there was anything I needed, I would let her know before leaving and heading back to my parents' house. Update. It's been 6 months since I initiated divorce proceedings. I received my copy of the agreement dissolving my marriage to Anita this morning. I never talked with her or saw her again after the time she came to my parents' house. My lawyer handled it all. I gave her the heavily mortgaged house with the highly financed furniture and furnishings to release all claims on me. I also had my name taken off the mortgage. She assumed full responsibility for making the payments. Of course, without a job, she had to put it up for sale and lost her shirt on the deal. She attempted to contest the divorce, but I threatened to change the reason for divorce to infidelity and release the pictures of her and Sam to the internet if she didn't sign the papers in 48 hours. She signed them within the required time, and that is why I'm a free man today. I guess she decided that she didn't want me that bad. Anyway, she was terminated from her job, but she's a smart lawyer and negotiator, so she found another one within a month, not making as much or with the benefits. Seniority brought her in her old job, but I hear she's getting by and dating again. Lots of luck to the boyfriend if she lands him. I wonder if she's told him about our divorce and the reason. Maybe I should enlighten him. Marie divorced Sam and took him to the cleaners financially. He found another job too, after he was terminated. but he's struggling to make the alimony and child support payments with his new salary. I'm now living in Santa Maria, California, a quiet place near the coast, about halfway between the Bay Area and LA. This positions me pretty well to cover both southern and northern parts of the state. I moved here about 4 months back and have an apartment in a complex with other singles and young couples, most trying to save money for a down payment on a house. Housing costs are high out here, and it takes big bucks to buy into the market. I have a steady girlfriend who lives in the same complex. She's divorced, like me, but we're comfortable together, and I think we'll see how it goes in the future with me traveling so much. I really need to trust the one I marry, but I need to make a move before too long if we want to start a family. Biological clocks keep on ticking.
Story 3.
Ever since my mother-in-law started babysitting my son, his attitude towards me changed drastically. Now I have discovered my husband, mother-in-law, and his old friend have been keeping secrets. Hi everyone, my name is Chloe, 33 female, and I have been married to my husband Sebastian, 34 male, for the past 7 years. We have had a good relationship and a good marriage, but now it seems like everything is coming to an end. Let me tell you from the start. So, my husband has had this female best friend named Alicia, 34 female. They were in high school and dated for a year, then they realized that they were better as friends and continued to stay as friends. Now, Alicia was a typical pick-me girl that you can expect. I hated hanging out with her. Alicia was one of those girls who always had to be the center of attention. And she definitely enjoyed putting me down to make herself look better. I remember the first time I met her. She gave me this look up and down like she was sizing me up. Then she made some comments about how she was so glad my husband had finally found someone and how she was glad that she didn't have to marry him anymore. It felt so weird, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being sensitive. But as time went on, it became pretty clear that she had it out for me. There was this one time we were all out for dinner, and she started talking about how she and my husband used to go on these adventures together. She went on and on about this camping trip they took, where they got lost and had to rely on each other for survival. She made it sound like some epic romance, and I just sat there feeling like a third wheel. Then there was the time we were at a party, and Alicia decided to tell everyone about how my husband used to have this huge crush on her back in high school. She laughed about it, saying how he was always trying to impress her and how she thought it was cute. I could see my husband squirming in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but Alicia just kept going on. It was like she wanted to remind everyone, especially me, that she was his first love or something. The worst, though, was probably last Christmas. We were all at my in-laws' house, and Alicia had come over with this elaborate homemade pie. She kept going on about how she learned to make it from scratch, and how it was my husband's favorite. When I mentioned that I had baked cookies for the occasion, she gave me this pitying look and said, "Oh, that's sweet. I'm sure your cookies are delicious too." Now, I know it doesn't sound so mean, but the way she said it was so condescending. I could have screamed. To make matters worse, my husband didn't seem to see how awful she was. He insisted that she was just being friendly and that I was overreacting. He kept reminding me that they have a lot of history and that she meant no harm, but it felt like every time we were around her, she was trying to undermine me and make me feel small. I tried talking to my husband about it, but it always turned into a fight. He got defensive, saying that Alicia was just his friend and that I was being paranoid. It's like he couldn't see how toxic she is, and it made me feel like I'm the crazy one. I even considered trying to distance myself from her, but it was hard because she was such a big part of my husband's life. However, the problem was that Sebastian had known Alicia for a long time, and even his family was quite fond of her, so it was very difficult for me to share this with him. The one time I did, he told me that she was just a friend and that I was just being insecure. However, I started to notice how Sebastian's mom, Regina, 66 female, acted towards Alicia and me. She always tried to compare us and preferred Alicia over me. I will admit that I felt pretty bad because of this. For instance, Regina would always invite Alicia to family dinners without consulting me first. She'd call Alicia practically family, which felt like a slap in the face. At one of these dinners, Regina went on and on about how Alicia had such a natural talent for cooking, while subtly implying that my cooking was just okay. She even asked Alicia for her recipe for a dish that I had made, as if Alicia's version would automatically be better. Another time, during a family gathering, Regina made a comment about how lucky Sebastian was to have two such beautiful and talented women in his life. But then she added, looking at Alicia, "Some people just have that natural charm and grace." It was clear who she was talking about, and it wasn't me. It felt like Regina was always finding ways to highlight Alicia's supposed superiority. Despite all of this, I love Sebastian a lot, and I tried my best to get over it. I even tried to hang out with Alicia more and get to know more about her, thinking maybe if we became friends, it would make things easier. There was one time we went shopping together, and I tried to make an effort to bond with her, but it ended with her making passive-aggressive comments about my fashion sense. She said things like, "Oh, that's cute. It's nice that you don't feel the need to follow trends," while she picked out the latest styles for herself. I realized that I didn't need to be friends with her just because she was friends with my husband. It became clear that trying to get closer to her was just making me miserable. Every interaction with her felt like a competition, one that I hadn't signed up for and didn't want to be a part of. I decided to distance myself from Alicia and focus on my own well-being. It wasn't easy, especially because of how intertwined she was with Sebastian's life and family. But I knew I had to do what was best for my mental health. I started finding excuses to avoid gatherings where Alicia would be present, and made an effort to plan activities with Sebastian that didn't involve her. A few years ago, when I was pregnant with my son Jamie 7 male, I was really looking forward to starting this new life with my new family. However, the day I went into labor, I couldn't reach Sebastian. I had to call my best friend, who took me to the hospital and was in the delivery room with me. Sebastian came to the hospital 5 hours after Jamie was delivered. When I asked him where he was, he told me Alicia's marriage had just ended, and he was consoling her. I was furious. I did feel bad about her marriage ending, but I needed him, and he had picked her over me and our baby. I told him that he could not see the baby until he broke everything off with Alicia and swore on Jamie that he would never see her again. He started arguing with me, saying that I was being hormonal and acting like a brat, and that Alicia was his best friend and he couldn't just cut her out of his life. I told him that he could then cut me and his son off. After a lot of arguing, he promised me that he would never see her again. I also made him promise me that I would never have to see her again, and that if his parents wanted to see Alicia, they could see her but not mention it to me. Also, to never invite her to family events when I was coming. To be honest, I didn't feel entirely good about giving him that ultimatum, but I was at my breaking point. It wasn't just about that one incident, but years of feeling second place to Alicia. I knew it was drastic, but I needed him to understand how serious I was about this. After Jamie was born, I thought things would get better, and for a while, they did. Sebastian kept his promise, and Alicia was no longer a looming presence in our lives. It felt like a weight had been lifted. Regina wasn't too happy about it at first, but she eventually came around when she saw how happy Sebastian and I were. Family events became less stressful, and I started to feel more at ease. Despite this improvement, there were moments when the past would creep up. For instance, one evening, Regina made a comment about how she missed Alicia's baking during Christmas. I had to remind myself to breathe and let it go. It was clear that Alicia still had a place in their hearts, and while it stung, I understood that years of friendship and family ties don't just disappear. There was also the time when Sebastian's old friend group had a reunion. They wanted to invite Alicia, and Sebastian had to explain the situation to them. It was awkward, and I could see it pained him to exclude her, but he did it for our family. Another challenge was rebuilding trust. The incident during Jamie's birth had left a scar. There were times when I would wonder if he resented me for making him choose, and I had to work through those insecurities. Counseling helped us a lot during this period. We learned to communicate better, and Sebastian started to see things from my perspective. He realized how much his prioritizing Alicia had hurt me over the years. Everything was going well, and a few years passed after that. I honestly thought that this was all behind me and that I didn't have to worry about this anymore. Since my son has grown up now, sometimes I ask my mother-in-law, Regina, to babysit, especially during the hours I work. It's only for a few hours every day at a time and sometimes on weekends. However, ever since she started babysitting my son, I have noticed that Jamie's attitude towards me has changed completely. He is no longer the sweet son who loved to hug me whenever he saw me. Now he throws tantrums and seems so different. For example, Jamie used to be excited when I came home from work, running to give me a big hug. Now he barely acknowledges me, and sometimes even refuses to talk to me. He used to love our bedtime stories, but now he insists that Grandma tells better stories and doesn't want me to read to him anymore. It's heartbreaking. I've also noticed that Jamie has started saying things that sound suspiciously like Regina's opinions. He'll say things like, "Grandma says you should spend more time with me," or, "Grandma makes the best food, not you." It's like he's parroting what she says, and it makes me wonder what she's telling him when I'm not around. One time, we were out shopping, and Jamie threw a massive fit because I wouldn't buy him a specific toy. He screamed, "Grandma would get it for me." It was so embarrassing and out of character for him. He never used to behave like that. When I tried to explain why he couldn't have it, he just kept saying that Regina always lets him have what he wants. Things came to a head a few weeks ago when Jamie refused to come home after spending the day with Regina. He said, "I want to stay with Grandma, she's nicer to me." I was devastated. I tried to talk to Regina about it, but she brushed it off, saying that Jamie was just being a typical kid and that I shouldn't worry. But it's hard not to. I've also noticed Jamie's behavior has changed in other subtle ways. He's become more defiant, often ignoring my requests or doing the exact opposite of what I ask. Simple things like asking him to clean up his toys or put on his shoes have become daily battles. It's like he's testing me constantly, and it's exhausting. Another thing that has really bothered me is that Jamie has started making comparisons between me and Regina. He'll say things like, "Grandma's house is more fun," or "Grandma lets me watch whatever I want." It feels like he's being pitted against me, and I don't know how to handle it. I've tried to talk to Sebastian about it, but he just thinks I'm overreacting again. I try to spend more one-on-one time with Jamie to rebuild our bond. We went to the park, baked cookies, and even had movie nights with his favorite films. But no matter what I did, it felt like Regina's influence was overshadowing my efforts. It had gotten to the point where I dreaded leaving him with her, but I didn't have many other options for childcare at that time. I didn't think much of it and thought that this was just part of growing up. But about a week ago, he told me that he misses his new mommy. I was surprised and asked him who his new mom was, but he didn't say anything and ran back to his room. I was worried about his reaction, so I did something that I'm not proud of. I read his diary. In that, I found that the new mom he had been talking about was Alicia. He had written in his diary that, "Alicia is so nice. She gives me candies, but Dad says we can't tell Mommy or she will not let us see Alicia." I was heartbroken. Not only because my son was calling someone else the new mommy, or that my mother-in-law had let my son see Alicia and broke my boundaries, but that they had made my son lie to me. There were several other pages where he had talked about Alicia. He wrote about how she took him to the park, bought him toys, and even taught him how to ride a bike. These were all things I wanted to experience with him, and it felt like they were being stolen from me. I confronted Sebastian about it that night. He was defensive at first, saying that Jamie must have misunderstood things and that he never meant to go behind my back, but the diary entries were clear. And there was no denying that he had crossed the line. He admitted that he had taken Jamie to see Alicia a few times, thinking it wouldn't hurt since Jamie seemed to like her. He didn't understand how much it hurt me to be kept in the dark and undermined. I felt betrayed, not just by Sebastian but by Regina as well. She had clearly been facilitating these visits, knowing full well that I wouldn't approve. It was like she didn't respect my role as Jamie's mother, or my right to set boundaries for our family. I called her out on it, and she just shrugged it off, saying that she was just trying to keep everyone happy. Jamie's diary entries also revealed that Regina had been telling him that Alicia was like a second mom to him. No wonder he was so confused and acting out. He didn't know who to listen to or how to reconcile the conflicting messages he was getting from the adults in his life. It was heartbreaking to think about the confusion and stress he must have been feeling. I was angry. I waited for Sebastian to come home, and when he did, I asked him about this. He tried to deny it, but the proof was right there, so he couldn't. He said that Alicia just accidentally visited the house when he and Jamie were there, and Mom just innocently told Jamie that Alicia was his new mommy and it stuck. He claimed that he had only met Alicia once, but then I showed Jamie's diary to him, and his lies unraveled. He said, "So what if Alicia met him? This was all a mistake," he insisted, but I told him this wasn't a mistake. I set a boundary and he broke it. I told him to get out of the house and he left and stayed with his parents for the night. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all the emotions and thoughts. How could he do this? How could he put Jamie in such a confusing situation? I felt like my trust had been shattered, and I didn't know how we could move forward from this. I kept rereading Jamie's diary entries, each one breaking my heart a little more. The next morning, Regina called me. She was upset that I had kicked Sebastian out and said I was overreacting. She kept defending Alicia, saying that she was just trying to be nice to Jamie and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I told her that she had no right to go behind my back, and that she had completely disregarded my feelings and boundaries. She tried to argue, but I hung up on her. I was done with her meddling. He came home the next day and tried to talk to me, but I told him that I was done with him and that I wanted to leave him. He said that he couldn't believe I would say that over such a small thing. I told him it was not a small thing. The day our son was born, he picked Alicia over me, and now he has done it again. I'm not going to stand for this. I told him that he should take his stuff and move out, and that we would contact the lawyers and figure out the custody and everything else. He started crying and begging me not to do this. He kept saying how much he loved me and Jamie and how he never meant to hurt us, and that he couldn't imagine his life without us. But I was really done. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and deep sadness. I had given him so many chances to prove that he could prioritize our family, but he kept letting me down. It wasn't just about Alicia, it was about the pattern of disrespect and dishonesty. Every time he chose her over me, it felt like a knife to my heart. The day Jamie was born was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives, but instead it was marred by his absence and the realization that he would always put Alicia first. Sebastian kept insisting he didn't mean to hurt me, that he was just trying to be a good friend to Alicia, but that wasn't the point. The point was that he consistently disregarded my feelings and the boundaries we had set together. His actions showed me that he didn't respect me or our marriage. As he sat there crying, I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew this was the right decision for me and Jamie. We couldn't keep living in this toxic cycle. Jamie deserved to grow up in a home where his parents respected and valued each other, not one where there was constant tension and deceit. I started packing his things while he watched, still pleading with me to reconsider. He said he would cut Alicia off completely, that he would do anything to make things right, but I couldn't believe him anymore. His promises meant nothing when his actions repeatedly betrayed me. I told him I needed space and time to heal, and that meant he had to leave. As I packed, memories of our relationship flooded my mind. The good times, the laughter, the dreams we had shared. It was hard to let go, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness and self-respect for someone who didn't value them. Sebastian finally left, taking only a suitcase of his essentials. I told him I would arrange a time for him to come back and get the rest of his things when Jamie wasn't around. I wanted to shield our son from as much of this pain as possible. The house felt eerily quiet after he left. I sat down and took a deep breath, trying to process everything. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I felt a sense of relief knowing I had made the decision that was best for me and Jamie. I called my best friend and told her what had happened. She was supportive, reminding me that I deserved to be with someone who truly valued and respected me. A few hours later, I started getting calls from everyone. Regina also called me and told me that I was making a big mistake, but I told her that this had nothing to do with her and that she should stay out of it. And that she is to blame for this as well. I hung up on her. As I sat there, I couldn't help but replay the events in my head. I knew deep down that I needed to stand my ground, but the doubt crept in. What if I was overreacting? What if I was breaking up our family over something that could be fixed? This was making me question myself even more. Regina had always been a strong presence in Sebastian's life, and I wondered if I was wrong to push her away too. My phone buzzed with texts and voicemails from Sebastian, his parents, and even a few of our mutual friends. Most of them were urging me to reconsider, saying things like, "He made a mistake, give him another chance," or, "Think about Jamie, he needs both of his parents." It was overwhelming, and I felt like I was being pulled in a million different directions. One message stood out, though. It was from my best friend. She reminded me of all the times I had confided in her about feeling second to Alicia, about how lonely and hurt I felt when Sebastian would dismiss my feelings. She said, "You need to do what's best for you and Jamie. Don't let anyone guilt you into staying in a situation that's damaging to your well-being." But as I'm sitting alone in this house, I can't help but feel confused. Am I making a big mistake doing this? Am I taking this too far? What do you guys think? I would love to know. Update 1. Hi everyone. I know it's only been a day since I made the post, but I have a few updates. Things have become so much clearer now. So, I had packed essentials for Sebastian, but his iPad was left behind. Normally, I wouldn't have snooped, but I wasn't the same person I was a few days ago, so I opened his messenger apps and checked his chats. And, surprise, surprise, I found texts between him and Alicia. And guess what? The texts went back years. As it turns out, he never stopped talking to her. I spent all night going through these texts. I found messages that dated back to shortly after Jamie was born. The messages were heart-wrenching and eye-opening. Sebastian would tell Alicia how much he missed her and that he wished things could be different. He even expressed regret about not being able to openly see her, saying things like, "I hate that I have to keep you a secret from Chloe." In one conversation, Sebastian mentioned, "Sometimes I think about how easy things would be if we were together. I know it's complicated, but I can't help but wish." It was devastating to read how he'd been holding on to feelings for Alicia, all while pretending to be committed to our family. The texts also revealed how frequently they talked. They had long chats about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. Alicia would often send Sebastian updates about her life, including personal details and complaints about her own romantic relationships. Sebastian would respond with supportive messages, sometimes even giving her relationship advice. It was clear that their bond went way beyond just friendship. One message from Alicia was particularly painful. She said, "I know we can't be together, but I really cherish what we have. It's been hard without you." To which Sebastian responded, "I feel the same way. I wish things were different. I hate that I can't be more open about how I feel." It felt like a punch to the gut to see how he had been emotionally invested in her while our marriage was falling apart. There were also messages where Sebastian would complain about me, venting to Alicia about how difficult things were at home and how he felt trapped. It was a painful realization that he had been sharing intimate details about our marriage with someone else. Reading those messages made me feel incredibly betrayed. It was like he had been living a double life, sharing his frustrations with Alicia instead of working through them with me. I spent hours crying and trying to process everything I had found. The betrayal cut so deep, and it was hard to believe that someone I trusted so completely could be so dishonest. I felt like all the pain and confusion I had been feeling over the past few years suddenly made sense. The consistent pattern of neglect and dishonesty was finally laid bare. There is no more confusion in my head. I now know that I need to leave this man. He doesn't value me and he doesn't respect me or my wishes. Update 2. Hi everyone, I know it's been a month, but I've been figuring out a lot of things. I didn't confront Sebastian about the messages I had found right away. In the meantime, I hired movers to take his stuff to his mother's house, where he had been staying. The day they arrived, I got a call from Sebastian, but I didn't pick up. A few hours later, he showed up at my door crying and asking me how I could do this, and that he deserved a second chance. This was my moment, so I took a deep breath and decided to lay it all out. I told him about everything I found on his iPad, how he had never stopped talking to Alicia, how his secret conversations with her revealed his true feelings. I described the messages where he talked about missing her, regretting that he had to keep her a secret, and feeling trapped in our marriage. I made sure he knew I had read it all, and that I wasn't going to be manipulated by his pleas. I told him, "You've been living a double life, and now you can be with Alicia. You've always wanted this, and now you're free to pursue it without hiding your true feelings." His face went pale, and he started begging and pleading. He said things like, "I didn't mean for things to go this far, and I'm so sorry, please don't do this." He even tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "Think about Jamie, you're breaking up our family." Seeing him like that, crying and desperate, was a mix of pain and oddly satisfying feelings. I felt like I had finally taken control of the situation and stood up for myself. I reminded myself of all the times he had let me down and all the broken promises. I told him I needed him to leave and shut the door in his face. It was a harsh decision, but it felt like the right thing to do. I won't lie, it felt good seeing him cry like that. It was like a form of justice for all the times he had made me feel worthless. The next day, I started the process of formalizing the separation. I contacted a lawyer to discuss the legalities of the divorce and custody arrangements. I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly so that there wouldn't be any issues down the line. I was determined to get everything sorted out as smoothly as possible. Sebastian continued to call and text, trying to apologize and convince me to reconsider. He sent messages like, "I'm willing to do anything to make this right, and please, let's talk about this one more time." I didn't respond. I needed space, time to heal, and I wasn't ready to have any more conversations with him. I felt that every time I engaged with him, it was a step backward, and I really needed to move forward. So I told him to never text me or call me again and contact my lawyer if he wanted to say anything. After that, I blocked him. Update 3. Hey everyone, let me start by saying thank you for all the support and help during this tough time. Your advice and kind words have really helped me navigate through this mess. I'm still in the process of getting divorced, but Sebastian has finally given up on trying to win me back. It's been a long and difficult journey, but it feels like we're moving towards a resolution. Things with Jamie have been challenging. He's still trying to understand what's going on. He's been asking questions like, why isn't Daddy coming home? And when can we see Daddy again? It breaks my heart to see him confused and upset. I've been doing my best to explain things to him in a way that's appropriate for his age. I tell him that sometimes grown-ups need to live in different places, but that doesn't change how much we love him. Hopefully, things will get better with time. Thank you again for all your support and advice. It's been a huge comfort to know that I'm not alone in this. If anyone has gone through a similar experience, I'd love to hear how you managed the transition for your kids and yourself.
Story 4.
Long before their paths had crossed at the hotel, Brooke had carefully cultivated her circle of confidants. Each gathering served as a therapeutic escape from the chaos of her personal life, a place where stories were exchanged over glasses of wine and moments of levity softened the weight of past hardships. The women she surrounded herself with were a diverse group, some seasoned in navigating life's challenges, others newer to the art of resilience. Together, they formed a haven for unfiltered conversations, bound by an unspoken agreement to leave judgment at the door. The inn itself, perched on the edge of a quiet, picturesque town, was more than a meeting place. It was a sanctuary, imbued with the charm of old-world hospitality. From its wooden beams to the flickering lanterns on the terrace, it offered solace to weary souls seeking respite from life's tribulations. It was here that Brooke's tale, marked by betrayal and determination, began to unfurl before a captive audience. "Have you been in touch with your ex since the divorce?" one of the women at the table inquired, taking a sip from her intricately designed wine glass. The group was relaxing on the terrace. Brooke paused to consider her response before saying, "No, not since I threw him out and served him both divorce papers and a restraining order. I haven't seen or heard from him. He tried reaching out to the kids, but they ignored him after I explained everything he put us through." Allie, a newer member of the circle, spoke up curiously. "Was the split that bad? It sounds like there's still a lot of hurt there." "How long ago did it happen?" "About a year back. That a-hole fought it tooth and nail for an entire year. When he finally realized the kids wanted nothing to do with him, he gave up, signed the documents, and disappeared. Altogether, he's been out of the picture for 2 years now." "Good riddance," Brooke replied, her tone sharp with lingering resentment. Allie's next question seemed inevitable. "What made you decide to leave him?" "You mean the divorce?" "Because he was unfaithful. He was seeing his old flame, Gemma Evans." From behind, a voice interjected, "Jake Van Dam, cheating? That doesn't sound like him at all. And as for cheating with me, I think I'd remember that. Don't you agree? Completely absurd. I suppose this is just another one of your twisted stories, Mrs. Brooke Paquette." Brooke whipped her head around so quickly that the others half expected her eyes to pop out. Well, well. Look what the wind blew in. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here. And you've got plenty of gall yourself. You started manipulating Jake back when we were together. Your lies drove us apart, and now you're claiming he cheated on you with me? When exactly, pray tell? Gemma responded sharply. 2 years ago, as you're well aware. Brooke's tone was sharp enough to leave a mark. Gemma sneered. Oh, really? If I had been involved with Jake, don't you think I'd remember? 2 years ago, I was 5,000 miles away in Edinburgh, Scotland, studying general linguistics and tutoring students learning English. And I can prove it too, much more easily than you can prove you're even here right now. I just got back after 3 years abroad, and before that, I was teaching high school across the country. Brooke's face paled. This wasn't the scenario she had imagined, and it was bad news. If it wasn't Miss Evans, then who did your ex cheat with? Gemma pressed. Cornered, Brooke snapped. He cheated on me, so I threw him out. Gemma wasn't about to let it go. Oh, and in the process, you made sure he couldn't stay in this town, didn't you? Even his parents probably bought into your act. For the record, I don't believe he cheated. I think he caught on to you. Are those kids even his? Makes one wonder. Anyway, I have people to see, including Jake's parents. Brooke's face drained of color again. Don't you dare! I'll ruin you if you do, Gemma smirked, her gaze cold. Life hasn't been kind to you, has it? Seems like you're using more makeup than ever to cover the cracks. Relax, though. I'll save you the trouble. I'll be paying a visit to Jake's parents, and I have evidence to clear up your lies. By the way, thank you for driving him away. Once I find him, he'll be mine. As for your threats, please spare me. Tomorrow, I start my new job far from this viper's nest. Enjoy your lemons. With that, Gemma walked to her car and headed straight to the Van Dam residence. The house was just as she remembered, stately, with 3 parking spaces at the gate and 2 towering ginkgo biloba trees planted by Jake's ancestors. The long stone pathway led to a set of wide granite steps. She parked, grabbed her laptop from the trunk, and made her way to the front door. She knocked, and it was opened by Jake's grandfather. "Yes? How can I help you, young lady?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Van Dam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me?" "It's been a while." "Ah, yes. Weren't you mentioned in all that mess with Jake's marriage?" "Yes, sir. I'm here to tell you it was impossible for Jake to have had an affair with me. I was in Edinburgh at the time, and I can prove it." The old man studied her intently, his gaze sharp and probing. Gemma felt as though he could see right through her. After a moment, he smiled faintly. "Call me Rufus, the older Rufus," he added with a glint of humor. "It's brave of you to come. My son and his wife are convinced Jake is guilty." "Me? I've always doubted it. Jake's not that kind of man. So, why are you trying to clear his name?" Gemma knew this man would spot a lie in an instant, so she spoke honestly. "Because Jake doesn't know it yet, but I plan to be the next Mrs. Van Dam. First, though, I have to find him. Do you know where he is?" Rufus's eyes twinkled mischievously. "He told me not to share his whereabouts with anyone, but you're not just anyone. He's at St. Christopher's Crossing, doing well at the university there. Don't let on I told you." Gemma grinned. "Thank you. By the way, I'll be working at that university starting tomorrow, so I'm bound to see him." From deeper inside the house, a voice called out, "Dad, who's at the door? Don't let them sell you anything." Rufus chuckled. "You remember where the kitchen is?" Gemma nodded, but nearly collided with Jake's mother as she turned. Anna's expression twisted with anger. "You've got some nerve! Ruining my son's life and walking into this house uninvited? Get out!" Before Gemma could reply, Rufus growled, "Anna, she's my guest, and she deserves to be heard. She says she wasn't even here during all that nonsense." Anna hesitated, her anger faltering. "What? I don't believe it." Gemma raised her laptop. "I can show you." An hour later, Anna looked distraught, and Rufus was visibly furious. "Now what?" Anna whispered. Gemma opted for honesty again. "I'm not sure. Jake and I were close, and things might have turned romantic if Brooke hadn't interfered, but that's for Jake to decide. If I can find him." Anna, shocked by the revelations, decided her husband needed to hear this too. She smiled thinly. "Would you stay for dinner and share your story with Randall?" Gemma declined politely. "Thank you, but I need to prepare for my new job." She carefully avoided mentioning where she was heading. When Gemma was ready to leave, Anna pulled her aside, her tone hesitant and full of regret. Anna expressed a longing to reconnect with Jake, admitting that the family had made poor decisions and treated him unfairly. She asked Gemma to let them know if she ever found him. However, Gemma gently declined, explaining that Jake had disappeared for a reason, clearly not wanting to be found. She assured Anna she would pass along their message, but could not reveal his location. As Gemma made her way to her car, she spotted a man approaching. It didn't take long for her to recognize him as Jake's brother, Rufus. The sight of him was startling. He was past his prime, overweight, and lumbering with a gait that resembled a gorilla's. His large frame, thick neck, and heavy paunch were paired with wheezing breaths as he moved. Gemma continued to her car, hoping to avoid an encounter. Rufus, on the other hand, took note of her. She seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. His thoughts were less than polite, as he appraised her appearance with crudeness. When he entered the house, he casually asked his grandfather about the broad he saw leaving. The elder Van Dam remained impassive, merely stating that she was an old friend of Jake's. Rufus dismissed the information, but internally remained eager to keep his younger brother at a distance, for reasons of his own. Upstairs, Rufus retreated to his private apartment, designed for him after an accident rendered him a permanent resident of the family home. Meanwhile, Brooke reflected on her life and choices. By the time her divorce from Jake was finalized, he was 35 and she was 37. Their 2 children, born less than a year apart, were now 16 and 15. She thought back to when she first set her sights on Jake, who was just 18 at the time. Brooke had noticed him after a grueling 10-kilometer swim race, initially paying him no attention until a dark-haired girl began helping him out of his wetsuit. The interaction caught Brooke's interest. Observing him closely, she was struck by his athletic build, broad shoulders, strong arms, and muscular legs. His reddish-brown hair, green eyes, and chiseled features completed the picture. Brooke, then in her 20s, decided she wanted him and began plotting to make it happen. Breaking through Jake's reserved nature took 6 months. Fortunately for Brooke, the girl who had been a close friend to Jake relocated, making it easier for Brooke to manipulate her way into his life. When Jake eventually invited her to meet his family at a barbecue, she learned he was the youngest of three, with a brother and sister several years older. At the barbecue, Brooke couldn't help but compare Jake to his older brother Rufus. Although they shared similar features, their differences were stark. Jake was lean, with understated strength and a calm, thoughtful demeanor. Rufus, by contrast, was larger, louder, and aggressive, flaunting his strength and speaking with bluster. Rufus quickly noticed Brooke, his resentment toward his younger brother fueling his interest. He viewed Jake as too clever and decided to seduce Brooke. Within 2 weeks, Rufus had charmed and manipulated her into meeting him at a hotel. What followed was a raw, overpowering encounter that left Brooke reeling. Rufus showed no concern for her enjoyment, treating her like a conquest rather than a partner. His disdainful attitude extended to dismissing protection, leaving Brooke vulnerable. A month later, Brooke realized she was pregnant. When she confronted Rufus, he mocked her, telling her to pin the pregnancy on Jake or terminate it. Shocked and desperate, Brooke chose the former. She seduced Jake, surprised by the stark contrast between the two brothers. Jake was gentle, considerate, and far more attentive, traits Rufus lacked entirely. Brooke carried on, convincing Jake the child was his, while keeping the truth about Rufus hidden. Over time, the differences between the two men became even clearer. Jake's love and devotion clashed sharply with Rufus's brutishness and selfishness. Despite her manipulations, Brooke found herself trapped in a web of her own making, with guilt and regret lingering just beneath the surface. Brooke lay underwear on the bed of the same hotel room where she had first been with Rufus. She initially wanted to rush through the experience, but Jake had other plans. He took his time, bringing her to climax multiple times with unrelenting focus. When she was finally spent, lying beside him, her hand wandered to his shorts. The moment she felt him, she froze in disbelief at his size. Nervousness crept in as she wondered how she could handle him, but Jake's tender care eased her fears. He wiped her face with a damp cloth, his calm and considerate nature further disarming her. Despite her apprehension, Jake gently guided her, allowing her to take the lead. As she hesitated, her body responded instinctively, preparing for him. The experience, far from the discomfort she had anticipated, became something she began to enjoy. His deliberate movements and attention to her every reaction sent waves of pleasure coursing through her. She lost track of time, her mind blank except for the sensations consuming her. By the end, she was utterly overwhelmed, her body trembling as she collapsed beside him. Jake's kindness extended beyond the bedroom. When she struggled to stand afterward, he supported her, helped her to the bathroom, and made sure she was safe and comfortable. As he showered, Brooke lay in bed, lost in thought. The experience had been unlike anything she'd ever known. Jake was patient, caring, and attentive. Everything Rufus was not. The stark contrast between the two brothers made her realize how much she valued Jake. Yet, even as she admired him, a selfish part of her craved the thrill Rufus provided, despite his flaws. 3 months later, Brooke and Jake married in a quiet ceremony. Brooke settled into her new life with a devoted husband who treated her with love and respect. She enjoyed the stability Jake provided, but she couldn't resist the temptation of keeping Rufus as a side fling. For Brooke, Rufus was merely a distraction, a quick and detached indulgence that didn't compare to the depth of her relationship with Jake. She justified her actions by focusing on how effortlessly she juggled her double life. Years passed, and Brooke continued her precarious balancing act. However, Rufus's reckless lifestyle eventually caught up with him. 13 years after their first encounter, his excessive use of anabolic steroids led to a catastrophic heart incident. While at the gym, he collapsed, saved only by the quick actions of a nurse exercising nearby. Emergency responders managed to stabilize him with CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Tests revealed that Rufus had suffered a myocardial rupture, a direct consequence of prolonged steroid use. He was whisked into emergency surgery, his life hanging by a thread. The event was a harsh reckoning for Rufus and a sobering reminder of the choices that had led him to this point. Rufus left the hospital a changed man, his once muscular physique reduced to flabby weakness. His body, ravaged by years of steroid use, now required constant care and attention. Bitter and resentful, he began manipulating Brooke, planting seeds of dissatisfaction in her mind. He criticized Jake relentlessly, urging Brooke to demand more from her husband. More money, more effort, and more luxury. while playing the helpless victim of his own circumstances. Over time, Rufus's influence began to show. Brooke's attitude toward Jake soured, her frustrations spilling out in constant nagging. Small annoyances became major arguments, and she started pushing Jake harder than ever. She demanded a new car, claiming the old one was beneath her. Meanwhile, Jake endured her outbursts in silence, absorbing each blow without retaliation. Their children, however, began to voice their discomfort, openly wondering how much more their father could take. One evening, during yet another tirade, Jake silently walked away, leaving Brooke mid-rant. Furious, she screamed after him, but he retreated to his office and slammed the door. When she followed him moments later, his response was explosive. For the first time in their marriage, Jake roared at her to leave him alone, his voice carrying the weight of years of pent-up frustration. At that moment, Brooke realized she had pushed Jake to his breaking point. She had always underestimated him, assuming he would never fight back. What she failed to understand was that Jake was the type of man who endured quietly, until he didn't. And when he reached that limit, his reaction was swift and decisive. Jake's patience had run out. He reflected on the deep rift in their relationship and the toll it had taken on his spirit. He knew he needed to protect himself, not only emotionally, but also financially. Years earlier, anticipating trouble with his father and brother at the family business, Jake had taken precautions. Despite being groomed by his grandfather to become the company's technical executive, his father had pushed him aside, likely influenced by Rufus. When his father eventually fired him on a technicality, Jake walked away without regret. After leaving the family company, Jake was quickly scooped up by its biggest competitor, who offered him a flexible, well-paying position with excellent benefits. On the advice of his grandfather, Jake had also established his own freelance business in Luxembourg, funneling most of the income into offshore accounts. This financial independence had always been a quiet safety net, one Brooke never questioned, assuming it was merely extra earnings from side projects. Now, Jake decided to make significant changes. He redirected all freelance income to his offshore accounts, cut back his workload, and committed to spending more time with his children. He was done with the grueling hours and the endless demands. The next morning, Jake sat in the kitchen sipping coffee and reading the news on his tablet when Brooke stormed in, demanding to know why he hadn't come to bed. Jake, calm but firm, responded that she had likely waited only minutes before falling asleep, and he had no intention of discussing her accusations further. Before Brooke could unleash a tirade, Jake interrupted. He laid out his decision. He had returned all freelance assignments and reduced his work week to 30 hours. If she wanted more money, she could get a job herself. He also addressed her behavior, making it clear that her constant disrespect was pushing their marriage to the brink of divorce. Without waiting for a response, Jake walked out, announcing he was going out for breakfast, a rare indulgence for himself. Stunned, Brooke sat in silence, unable to process the transformation in her husband. She had never seen him so resolute. Finally, she picked up her phone and called Rufus, desperate for guidance. She complained about Jake's newfound defiance, but Rufus only laughed, reassuring her that he had anticipated this and had a backup plan in place. Jake was reviewing some documents at his desk when his secretary called to inform him of an unexpected visitor. He confirmed he had no appointments scheduled, but the visitor insisted it was urgent. Jake sighed, weary from weeks of escalating tensions with Brooke. Their marriage had deteriorated rapidly after his ultimatum to reduce his work hours and prioritize his own well-being. Brooke had retaliated with a sharp ultimatum of her own. No money, no intimacy. Jake, unshaken, moved into the guest room, leaving Brooke fuming. While Brooke's frustration grew, her attempts to seduce Jake into submission failed. Rufus, her fallback, proved useless, unable to satisfy her due to his declining health and physical condition. Within weeks, Brooke's frustrations peaked, but Jake remained unmoved. That morning, an elderly woman entered Jake's office, handed him 2 sealed envelopes, and delivered the words, "No one wants to hear. You've been served." She apologized before leaving, adding a warning to Jake's secretary to keep an eye on him. Jake stared at the envelopes, feeling a mix of relief and anguish. He expected divorce papers, but was blindsided by a restraining order barring him from contacting Brooke, their children, or his parents. Worse, the documents included a sworn affidavit falsely alleging an affair with Gemma Evans. The betrayal stung deeply, but Jake resolved to act swiftly. He blocked their shared accounts, sought legal counsel through a professional contact, and leased a small flat to weather the storm. The betrayal crystallized his determination to protect himself and his future. Meanwhile, Brooke overheard her children, Olivia and Brian, discussing their struggles. When Brian expressed a desire to talk to his father, Brooke suggested Rufus instead. Olivia's sharp reply stunned her mother. Olivia called Rufus a disgusting, sweaty pervert and revealed disturbing behavior, offering money for inappropriate favors. Brooke was horrified. Could Rufus really have acted this way toward his own daughter? That evening, more unsettling truths emerged. Confronted with Rufus's predatory nature, Brooke could no longer ignore the danger he posed, not only to her children, but also to herself. Despite their issues, Jake's influence on the children had instilled in them a sense of self-respect that shielded them from Rufus's worst. However, Brooke now faced the grim reality of being financially tied to Rufus. Jake's steady child support had sustained her lifestyle, but she feared that source of stability might soon end. For the first time, she began to regret her decisions. At the university, Gemma Evans met Professor Leonard Daltrey, who welcomed her warmly. A widower with a girlfriend, Daltrey described the ins and outs of campus life and mentioned her temporary housing arrangement with his friend Nathaniel Thompson. He suggested she consider settling in St. Christopher's Wood, where faculty could access prime housing plots. He wistfully mentioned a talented part-time amanuensis, skilled in working with children with behavioral and learning difficulties, who had designed a nearby center for such students. Though the man had declined teaching roles, Daltrey admired his work and hoped to recruit him. Exploring the area with Nadia Thompson, Gemma stumbled upon a sign advertising land for sale with an approved building permit. Enchanted by the location, she expressed her desire to build a home there but worried about finding the right designer. Nadia reassured her, mentioning a friend who was both an aeronautical engineer and an accomplished designer. "He's building his own house nearby," Nadia explained. "He's a bit reclusive, but he's good company once he warms up. I'll invite him to dinner Friday so you can meet him." Delighted by the prospect, Gemma agreed enthusiastically, eager to meet the mysterious designer. At the Van Dam estate, Brooke stood nervously across from Rufus Van Dam Sr., her voice uncharacteristically small as she asked, "Granddad, do you know where Jake is?" The old man studied her closely, noting her distress and the cracks in her usually composed demeanor. A sharp observer of human behavior, he already suspected what she was about to reveal. "I won't confirm or deny that, dear," he replied evenly. "Why do you ask? Trouble in paradise?" Brooke's startled expression gave her away, though she stopped herself from blurting out an answer. Her hesitation didn't escape Rufus Sr.'s notice. He decided it was time to stop indulging her facade. In a cold, cutting tone, he remarked, "Rufus has always had some vile tendencies, hasn't he? And his steroid obsession hasn't helped." Brooke stammered in protest, but Rufus Sr. was unrelenting. "Don't play dumb with me, young lady. I may be old, but I'm far from senile. Let's not pretend those kids of yours share Jake's DNA. Your blue eyes, Jake's green, and both children have brown. That's almost impossible genetically. They resemble Jake only because Rufus and Jake looked alike when they were younger. But Rufus has brown eyes, and you've spent far too much time in his bed." Brooke's world seemed to collapse around her. She gripped the chair for support, unable to form a coherent response. Rufus Sr. pressed on mercilessly. "You aligned yourself with the wrong man, drove the good one away, and now you're here expecting me to help you fix your mess. Whether or not I know where Jake is, I won't help you. Get out." As Brooke fled, the old man stood by the window, deep in thought. Perhaps it was finally time to write that letter he'd been putting off. Meanwhile, Gemma was waiting at the Thompsons' door, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. She had been renting their guest house for months, but this was her first invitation into their home. When the door opened, she was greeted by Nathaniel, who introduced himself warmly. She noted the deep scar running along his otherwise handsome face and his slight limp, wondering what had happened to him. Inside, she met Nadia and their little boy, Jakob, who seemed shy but polite. Over tea, Gemma complimented their home, calling it stunning and asking how they'd found such a gem. Nadia hesitated, her face clouding briefly before she replied, "It's a long, complicated story with a happy ending. It's also Nathan's story, so I'd need his blessing to share it. Let's just say he wrestled this place out of the hands of some local tyrants." Curious, Gemma asked if Nathan had been married before. Nadia explained that Jakob was Nathan's son from his first marriage, and that Nathan was a widower. Then, with a bright smile, Nadia shared some happy news. She was expecting. Gemma hugged her warmly, thrilled for her. Just as she was about to ask when the baby was due, Nathan appeared and introduced a visitor. Gemma froze. "Jake!" she exclaimed, rushing to hug him. But Jake remained stiff and distant, his only response a cool, Gemma, long time. No see. Her joy evaporated as she stepped back, confusion and hurt written all over her face. Nathan and Nadia exchanged glances before Nathan said gently, "You two should talk. Use the office." Once inside, Jake turned to her, his expression guarded. "Gemma," he began, "you signed an affidavit claiming we had an affair while I was married to Brooke. That lie destroyed my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you?" Gemma felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. The full weight of Brooke's manipulations hit her, and anger boiled within. Straightening her back, she looked Jake in the eye, her voice steady and resolute. She was determined to set things right. Jake was stunned as Gemma launched into her explanation. She began by assuring him that during the years she spent in Europe, she never communicated with Brooke, nor would she have shared personal details with her. Gemma recounted a moment when she publicly corrected Brooke after overhearing her lies in a pub. Following that confrontation, she met with Jake's parents and grandfather, sharing the truth about her whereabouts. It was his grandfather who hinted that Jake might be nearby, prompting her to seek him out. When Jake hesitantly asked about the affidavit, Gemma's response was unequivocal. It was forged. She insisted she would never have betrayed him while he was married, nor would she have lied about such a thing. Jake, visibly shaken, confessed he had believed she had betrayed him and struggled with that belief for years. Yet, as she spoke, he began to trust her again, recalling her honesty during their friendship and the verifiable details she had just shared. Relieved, Gemma took a deep breath and, summoning her courage, asked if they could reconcile. Jake stepped forward, holding her close, and asked if she could forgive him for doubting her. Gemma immediately dismissed the idea of blame, reminding him that he had been manipulated. As Jake leaned in for a cheek kiss, Gemma turned her head, capturing his lips in a passionate kiss, surprising him with the intensity of her affection. Jake, still processing the moment, marveled at her boldness. Gemma, her voice light but firm, declared she had been waiting for this chance since learning he was no longer with Brooke. She made it clear she wasn't giving up on him, no matter how long it took. Jake admitted his struggles, explaining the isolation he sought while building his remote home. He described himself as damaged goods, revealing the emotional scars he had yet to heal. Gemma, unwavering, promised to stand by him through it all. She then hinted at suspicions about the paternity of Jake's son, suggesting there might be more to uncover. When they rejoined Nathan and Nadia, Gemma announced with quiet confidence that the issue between her and Jake was resolved. Nadia, delighted, teased her about her quick work. Gemma smiled, pulling Jake closer, and revealed her intentions: to never let Jake out of her sight again, to seek justice for his past, and to inquire about purchasing the plot of land she had admired earlier. The dinner that followed was lively, with Gemma sharing warm stories from her past with Jake. But the mood turned serious when she asked Jake a pointed question. How had Brooke managed to deliver a fully developed baby after a 6.5-month pregnancy? Jake admitted he had never questioned it at the time, overwhelmed by the experience of becoming a father. Nathan gently suggested the possibility of a setup, given how suspicious the timeline seemed. Though Jake initially resisted the idea, noting the strong resemblance between the children and himself, Nadia pressed further. She asked if there was anyone else in the family who looked similar to Jake. Gemma immediately pointed to Rufus, suggesting he might be the key to the mystery. Jake hesitated, reluctant to consider such a possibility, but Nadia's practical approach prevailed. She proposed a paternity test, advising Jake to seek legal representation. Turning to Nathan, she urged him to contact Donna Marshall, a renowned attorney known for her unmatched skills. Jake, though shaken, nodded in agreement, realizing it was time to uncover the truth once and for all. Brooke was spiraling. 2 weeks after Jake's grandfather bluntly refused to help her locate him, she was still drowning in her predicament. She no longer wanted Rufus around her children, but she felt financially dependent on him. Preparing dinner one evening while the kids worked on school assignments, she was startled by a knock at the door. Peering out, she saw a man and a woman standing on her porch. Opening the door cautiously, she asked, "What can I do for you?" The woman spoke first, confirming Brooke's identity as Mrs. Paquette, formerly married to Jake Van Dam. Brooke nodded warily, and the man then presented a warrant, explaining they were there to collect DNA samples from her children. Any refusal would lead to her arrest. "What? Why do you need their DNA?" Brooke demanded. "For a paternity test," the woman replied flatly. The ground seemed to fall out from under Brooke. She had always clung to the hope that Jake's bond with the children might one day bring him back to her, and the substantial child support payments that sustained her lifestyle. If the test proved they weren't his, all of that would vanish. At the Van Dam estate, another pair of officials arrived at Rufus Jr.'s apartment, accompanied by a police officer. Rufus Sr. observed the scene silently, thinking, Gemma must have found Jake. Now the reckoning begins. When Rufus Jr. refused to cooperate and lashed out at the officer, it took only moments for the younger, stronger man to subdue him. Rufus Sr. watched his grandson take a humiliating walk to the police car, his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 weeks later, Gemma burst into Jake's apartment holding a sealed envelope. "The results are here," she called out, her voice a mix of anticipation and dread. She knew the outcome would be life-altering, and she steeled herself to support Jake no matter what. They sat on the couch together as Jake opened the envelope and read the report. His face turned pale, and Gemma's concern deepened. "Jake," she said gently, "are you okay? You look like you're going to have a heart attack." Jake shook his head, his voice hard with anger. "I'm not having a heart attack, but I'm about to cause some. Both kids are Rufus's. That cheating ex-wife of mine and that bastard are going to pay for everything they've done to me." Gemma leaned into him, her presence warm and grounding. She had been patient with Jake, knowing he was still healing. Though they had shared moments of closeness, cuddles and chaste kisses, he had held back, and she respected his pace. Yet, as she looked into his eyes now, she saw a vulnerability that melted her heart. "Gemma," Jake began hesitantly, "I love you. I always have. But I feel like I let you down when I let Brooke manipulate me. I want to be with you, but I need to finish this chapter of my life first. You deserve more than a rebound. If you can't wait for me, I understand." Relief washed over Gemma. She knew how difficult it was for Jake to express his emotions, and his words affirmed his love and respect for her. Smiling, she cupped his face and kissed him deeply, her touch filled with reassurance and devotion. Jake pulled back, startled by her intensity. "You're not taking the out I just offered?" he asked, half in disbelief. "Not a chance," she replied softly. "I'm here, Jake. I'll be with you through it all." Jake hugged her tightly, whispering shyly, "Would you hold off on building your house until this is resolved? You might not need it. I can expand mine to make it our home." Gemma was stunned. "Is that an invitation to live with you?" she asked. "It is," he said earnestly. "I'm as committed to you as you are to me. If you want a ring and a wedding, I'll give you that. But to me, all that matters is that we're in this together." Gemma smiled. "Yes, I want a ring, something simple and timeless for both of us. Once this mess is behind us, we'll jump over a broom if we have to." A week later, Jake and Gemma sat in attorney Donna Marshall's office. Jake explained his desire for retribution, leaving no stone unturned. Donna, while sympathetic, admitted she wasn't the best fit for the aggressive legal strategy Jake needed. However, she referred him to a trusted colleague, an attorney who specialized in dismantling the kind of manipulative schemes Jake had endured. "This lawyer thrives in murky waters," Donna assured them. "If anyone can get you the justice you deserve, it's her." Jake and Gemma exchanged a look, ready to take the next step together. Sometime later, Brooke clung to a fragile sense of peace in the weeks following the DNA tests, hoping the storm had somehow passed. She had confided in Jake's grandfather, who helped her shield the children from Rufus Jr.'s influence. Rufus Jr., cowed by his recent police encounter, stayed away, for now. But as she prepared dinner one evening, a furious pounding on the front door shattered her illusions. When she opened it, Rufus Jr. stood there, purple-faced and trembling with rage. "What is this?" he bellowed, waving a crumpled stack of papers. Brooke stepped back instinctively. "I don't know. You tell me." Rufus shoved the papers at her. "Your precious Jake is demanding an obscene amount of money from me for raising my children, and to enforce it, he's frozen all my assets." Brooke staggered back, sinking into a chair. The reality hit her like a freight train. "Jake knows. He's awake and coming for us." The thought of his wrath sent chills through her. She knew her life of luxury was over, and panic began to set in. Rufus was still ranting when another knock at the door interrupted him. Brooke hesitated, but the persistent knocking left her no choice. She opened it to find a small man with round glasses and a mustache, accompanied by a woman filming with a camcorder. "Mrs. Brooke Paquette?" the man asked. When Brooke nodded, he handed her an envelope. "You've been served. Have a nice day." Brooke closed the door with trembling hands and returned to her chair. Opening the envelope, her worst fears were confirmed. The documents outlined DNA results proving Jake wasn't the father of her children, but Rufus was. There were also demands for reimbursement of child support with interest and damages for fraud and deception. The total was staggering. Adding to her horror, Gemma Evans had filed a separate lawsuit for defamation and falsifying an affidavit. Brooke's panic spiraled until Rufus assured her the company would cover her legal costs. "You're the mother of my kids," he said smugly. "I'll take care of it." That evening, during a tense family dinner, Rufus Jr. made a bold announcement. He declared that he and Brooke had developed feelings for each other, and she was now his girlfriend. He vowed to care for their children, while the company's lawyers fought Jake's ridiculous demands. Rufus Sr. interrupted quietly, but firmly. "You'll need to find your own lawyer. The company won't fund your defense. Jake has suffered enough because of you." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the table. Rufus Jr.'s father, Randall, exploded. "What? He's entitled to defend himself against these baseless accusations. The company has excellent lawyers. Use them." Rufus Sr.'s voice turned icy. "The accusations aren't baseless. They're backed by DNA evidence." Rufus and Brooke have been deceiving Jake from the start. Jake's demands are valid, and our company has strict rules about fraternization. Rufus broke every single one. If our lawyers get involved, it will be to enforce those rules, not protect him. Randall bristled. "I'm the CEO, not you," Rufus Sr. laughed bitterly. "And I own 70% of the company. As chairman of the board, I overrule you. The company's resources won't be wasted on this sham." Furious, Rufus Jr. kicked his chair across the room and stormed out. In the hallway, he stood panting, trying to regain his composure. Rufus Sr. followed him out, his voice dripping with venom. "If you try to hurt Jake again, I'll bury you so deep the devil won't find you," he growled. Rufus Jr. sneered. "And how do you plan to do that, old man? I have friends too." Rufus Sr. leaned in close. "Try me. You'll find out this old dog still has teeth." He turned to leave, but patted Rufus Jr.'s back mockingly. "You should work on your health. You won't live to see old age like this." The next morning, at breakfast, Randall and Rufus Jr. pressed Rufus Sr. to reconsider using company lawyers. But after reviewing the evidence, the patriarch was resolute. "If I find out you've even consulted a company lawyer, you'll both be out on the street before you know what hit you, understood?" With that, he left the room and returned to his office. Sitting at his desk, he dialed the University of St. Christopher's Crossing. "Good morning, this is Professor Van Dam. Could I speak with Professor Daltrey, please? It's rather important." A familiar voice greeted Rufus Sr. warmly over the phone. "Rufus, old friend, it's been too long. How are you?" Rufus Sr. smiled faintly, though his tone was serious. "Mentally sharp as ever, Leon. Physically, not so much. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I need a favor, one that involves two of your people." "Anything for you," Leon replied. "You were there for me during that nasty business with Short. When he was blackmailing students, it's my turn to repay the kindness." Rufus Sr. hesitated before continuing. "I'm not sure you'll like it. I plan to visit and convince two of your employees to join my company." "Which two?" Leon asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "Jake Van Dam and Gemma Evans." Leon sighed. "I can understand wanting Jake, but Gemma? She sought me out after hearing rumors about Jake's marriage. She wanted to clear his name and find him after his divorce. From what I've gathered, she succeeded, and I suspect the two are inseparable now." Leon paused. "When are you coming? I'll make sure they're available." "I can leave in 30 minutes. It's a 2-hour drive. I'd like you there as well." "You've got it," Leon said. "See you soon." Later that day, Leon was shocked to see how frail his old friend had become. Though Rufus Sr. looked tired and worn, his voice remained steady, and his eyes still carried their familiar spark. Before summoning Jake and Gemma, the two men shared a quiet, intense conversation. In Leon's office, Jake and Gemma joined the older men. The reunion between Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. Happiness mingled with the regret of lost time. Once they'd embraced, Rufus Sr. got straight to the point. "Jake, I need you to run the company for me." Jake stared at him, stunned. "Granddad, why? What about Dad and Rufus?" Rufus Sr.'s smile was tinged with sadness. "I'm ill, Jake. It's progressive. I'm nearing the point where I can't keep the terrible twosome from destroying the company. I've seen you work. I know you're capable of leading." Jake, visibly shaken, squeezed Gemma's hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I had my reasons, but the real question is, will you do it? Your girlfriend's input matters too." Jake glanced at Gemma. "Granddad, I'm building a home for us here, a family house." Gemma's head snapped up, surprised. A family house? So much for taking things slow. Smirking, she quipped. Should I stop taking the pill? Jake didn't miss a beat. As soon as possible, I'd love to have a few kids with you. Gemma leaped out of her chair and kissed him fiercely. Last one was yesterday, she said with a grin. That answer your question? Rufus Sr. coughed gently. Jake, Gemma, may I remind you we're not alone. And Jake, the company is less than an hour from here. Jake met Gemma's eyes and she nodded her approval. Okay, Granddad, but what about Dad and Rufus? They'll be dealt with. You won't have to worry about them. When do you want me to start? Jake asked. Rufus Sr.'s voice softened. Soon. I don't have much time. I'll be entering a clinic in about 10 days to ease my passing. After that, you can step in. Gemma frowned. Why all the secrecy? Rufus Sr. sighed. Randall and Rufus will fight to keep their cushy lives, even resorting to violence. I've already had to warn Rufus off using company lawyers to fight the lawsuits you've initiated, Leon interjected. We've devised a plan to ensure your safety and protect the company. Rufus Sr. gestured for Leon to continue. Once Rufus passes, trusted managers will implement a full lockdown of the company. I'm creating software to secure everything, similar to ransomware. Employees will be sent home on full pay during the transition. When the will is read, everything will fall into place, and you'll take over. Jake and Gemma were stunned by the scope of the plan. What about us? Jake asked. You'll stay out of it until the will is read, Leon explained. The rest will be handled. Jake's grandfather added, I'll write you a letter explaining everything. For now, it's best you stay in the dark. Jake's voice quivered. Granddad? Can I visit you in the clinic? No, Jake. I want to face the end alone. Remember me as I was. Take care of your mother. She's as much an innocent victim as you. Jake nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. I promise. The two embraced, their goodbye laden with unspoken words. As Jake and Gemma left, the weight of the conversation settled on them. Back at Jake's apartment, he broke the silence with a deep sigh. I'll miss him. He was more of a father to me than my own ever was. Gemma wrapped her arms around him, offering the only comfort she could. I know, she whispered. 2 weeks later, Jake had just wrapped up negotiations with a contractor recommended by Nathan. The goal was to finish the house quickly and to high standards. After deciding to settle down with Gemma, Jake had expanded the plans considerably. 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, geothermal heating, solar panels, and wind turbines. This would be a home for the future, built to last. As he sat in front of the unfinished house, a letter arrived bearing grim news. His grandfather had passed. Gemma found Jake reading it, and though she tried to console him, the weight of the loss was evident. It feels like I've lost a part of myself, Jake said quietly. The next day, a summons arrived for the reading of Rufus Sr.'s will. Jake, accompanied by Gemma, prepared himself for what was sure to be an emotional ordeal. As they drove, he noticed a black sedan tailing them. Concerned, Jake pulled into a mall parking lot, ready to confront whoever it was. The sedan stopped beside them, and a woman stepped out, flashing her FBI badge. We're here to ensure your safety, she explained. Please act as though you're unaware of us at the reading. It's all part of Mr. Van Dam's plan. Inside the lawyer's office, Jake entered the conference room, leaving Gemma in the waiting area. His father, Randall, and Rufus Jr. were already seated. The moment Jake walked in, Rufus Jr. sneered. Look who's here. Hoping to scavenge something, little rat. I'll make sure you leave with nothing. The lawyer's sharp voice cut through the tension. Sir, if you can't behave, you'll be removed. Understood? Rufus grumbled but stopped short of responding further. Randall seemed ready to interject, but wisely stayed silent after the lawyer's stern glare. With order restored, the reading began. As the lawyer read aloud, Jake's name caught his attention. All possessions listed with this office, including chairmanship of Van Dam Aeronautical Industries, are hereby transferred to my only son, Jacob Randall Van Dam. Jake was stunned. Only son? That's Dad, isn't it? What's happening? Randall erupted. I'm his son, and Rufus is my son. This is fraud, and I'll tear you apart. He lunged toward the lawyer, only to stop short as 4 massive men entered the room, taking positions beside him and Rufus Jr. One of them growled, You're not going to make me hurt you, are you? Randall backed down immediately, but Rufus Jr. wasn't as restrained. He lunged at Jake, shouting, I'll liquidate you, you bastard! Within moments, one of the guards had subdued him, leaving Rufus clutching his wrist in pain and seated again. Calm returned to the room as the lawyer continued. Mr. Van Dam anticipated this behavior, which is why these gentlemen are here. Now let me explain. Genetic evidence proves that Mr. Randall Van Dam is not the biological son of Rufus Van Dam Sr. Furthermore, Rufus Jr. is not his grandson. The room fell silent as the lawyer paused, then addressed Randall directly. When Mr. Van Dam learned of your treatment of your wife and your misuse of company funds for personal indulgences, such as leasing an apartment and hiring escorts, he made your wife an offer. She agreed, and she was inseminated with his seed. The genetic evidence confirms that Jacob Randall Van Dam is his son, not yours. Randall turned a livid shade of red before exploding in rage. Lunging at his wife, he screamed, "You cheated on me, you hoe! I'll sell you to a Russian brothel! I'll make you pay for this!" The guards moved swiftly, restraining him before he could cause harm. Meanwhile, Rufus Jr. sat gasping, his face a picture of shock and fury. The lawyer remained calm, his voice firm. "Any further outbursts, and you'll both be removed. We have notarized affidavits and indisputable genetic proof to support everything outlined here. Your actions have consequences, gentlemen, and the law will take its course." Jake sat quietly, processing the bombshell revelations. His mother, serene and composed, offered him a small, reassuring smile. Beside her, Randall and Rufus writhed in impotent rage as the lawyer moved on to finalize the reading, sealing their fates. 2 weeks later, the lawyer turned to Randall and Rufus Jr. and delivered a sharp blow. "Please note their behavior and threats for the file," he said to his assistants. Then, addressing Randall, he continued, "You won't be doing anything to anyone. We have proof of massive embezzlement totaling $6 million, funding your depraved lifestyle. That doesn't include the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. On top of that, you sold sensitive technology to rogue states and competitors. Federal agencies, the FBI, IRS, and others, are eager to have a long conversation with both of you." He turned to the guards. "Escort these men out and hand them over to the authorities." Outside, Brooke waited. She had seen Jake enter the building earlier with Gemma, her arm possessively around him. Her faint hope of rekindling something with Jake dimmed as the reality of his new relationship set in. 30 minutes later, her world crumbled further. She watched as Randall and Rufus Jr. were let out in cuffs, read their rights, and whisked away in separate police cars. Overwhelmed, she approached one of the guards. "What's going on? What happened in there?" The guard responded curtly. "They're wanted for fraud, embezzlement, and industrial espionage. Likely won't see the light of day for 20 years. Brooke's stomach sank. "Who's going to run Van Dam Industries?" The guard shrugged. "The other man, Jake Van Dam." Realizing everything Rufus had promised was gone, Brooke stumbled to Rufus's car, found the keys inside, and drove home, lost in despair. Months later, Brooke was desperate. Her meager income barely covered basic needs, let alone the luxurious lifestyle she had once enjoyed. Bills piled up, and the children's tuition weighed heavily on her mind. She saw only one solution: manipulate Jake into taking her back. Standing underwear before the mirror, Brooke failed to see how years of hard partying, heavy drinking, and substance obsession had ravaged her body. Plastic surgery at Rufus's insistence had left her with an artificial appearance. Her skin sagged unnaturally, her bosom implants looked stiff and unnatural, and her once attractive face was overly smoothed and expressionless. Despite this, Brooke felt confident she could win Jake back and push Gemma out of the picture. Early morning, parked near Jake's house, Brooke waited for Gemma to leave. As soon as she saw the blue Nissan Rogue drive away, she checked her makeup, pulled down her blouse to enhance her cleavage, and approached the house. She knocked, her eyes scanning the home Jake had designed. She dismissed its unique charm, already planning how to improve it to her tastes. The door opened, revealing Jake, his expression unreadable. He didn't invite her in, simply stood and stared. Squaring her shoulders, Brooke forced a sultry tone. "Jake, you're looking good. Life's treating you well, I see." "What do you want, Brooke?" Jake replied bluntly. "I thought we could talk. Aren't you going to invite me in?" Jake sighed. "Let's get this over with." He stepped aside and led her to his office. Keeping her from seeing the rest of the house, he gestured for her to sit, then settled across the desk. "Speak. What do you want?" Brooke hesitated. "Aren't you going to show me the house first?" "No. Now tell me why you're here." Brooke leaned forward, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Jake, we belong together. We have history. 2 children. It's time for us to fix this." Jake's expression hardened. "We do have history, but my version is far different from yours. You're out of your mind if you think we'll ever be together again." Unfazed, Brooke pressed on. "I made mistakes, but we have the children to think about. I can't provide for them properly. They're not my children, Brooke. DNA proved they're Rufus's. Why should I be responsible? You raised them for years. Rufus never cared for them the way you did. Jake sighed. Don't worry about the kids. I'll take care of them, but not for you. My mother begged me to look out for them, so I've made arrangements. They'll have everything they need, but you won't get a cent. I'm not funding your lifestyle. Brooke sat in stunned silence as Jake's words slammed the door on her plans. Brooke sat stiffly, her frustration mounting. This wasn't how she had envisioned the conversation. Jake, who had once been pliable and easily manipulated, now seemed utterly immune to her charms. She had conveniently forgotten the events leading to their divorce and was unprepared for this resolute version of him. Switching tactics, Brooke softened her voice, adopting a sultry tone. Jake, I know I made mistakes, but Rufus was behind it all. He's out of the picture now. We could be good together again. I know how to make you happy, ways that will blow your mind. Dump that frigid witch and come back to me. We could have it all. The good life, the four of us, like a family again. She shifted in her chair, crossing her legs and pushing her augmented chest against the fabric of her blouse, hoping to sway him. But her theatrics had the opposite effect. Jake's expression hardened with disgust. You look and act like a desperate courtesan, he said coldly. Our history tells me I should avoid you at all costs. I wouldn't touch you even wearing a hazmat suit. As for your children, I've made arrangements. Olivia will live at St. Christopher's Crossing when she starts college, and Brian will stay with my mother until he's ready for college. You can't provide a stable home, so I've taken care of it. You, however, won't see a cent from me. In fact, you owe me. Brooke was too stunned to speak as Jake paused, glaring at her. Then he added, If you try to fight me on this, I'll file charges for fraud and extortion. I'll let the courts know the children aren't mine, and that you deceived me during the divorce. Now get out. I've had enough. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Gemma stepped into the room, her radiant smile and obvious baby bump stealing Brooke's attention. She walked over to Jake, kissed him on the cheek, and whispered, You were right. There are two. Jake's grin widened and Brooke's composure shattered. You're pregnant, she blurted, watching her plan to win Jake crumble before her eyes. Gemma and Jake exchanged a glance, then Gemma turned to Brooke with a calm but triumphant smile. Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake the children he's always deserved. Now I heard you were leaving. We need to start planning the nursery. Brooke's face twisted in disbelief. Children? As in more than one? Gemma's smile brightened. Yes, twins. I'm 3 months along. The first ultrasound only showed one baby, but the second revealed 2 boys. She leaned down, kissed Jake deeply, and whispered, Boys? In his ear. Brooke stood abruptly. You can't do this to me. You're throwing me aside and taking my children, your niece and nephew, away from me. Jake's patience snapped. His tone turned icy. I don't know what Olivia and Brian are to me, Brooke. You tell me. Keep in mind that Randall wasn't Rufus Sr.'s biological son, and I'm not Randall's biological son either. I'm Rufus Sr.'s son. The only connection we have is through our mother. Brooke's face drained of color as the full weight of Jake's words hit her. Since Randall and Rufus Jr.'s arrests, she had been completely cut off from the Van Dam family. Anna had refused any contact, and Brooke's own life had spiraled into poverty. Living in a dingy apartment and selling her possessions just to scrape by, she was truly alone. Jake's voice cut through her despair. If it were up to me, you'd rot in hell, but my mother and Gemma think otherwise. They believe you should be given a chance because, for better or worse, you're still the mother of your children. They convinced me that if I didn't intervene, you'd become a wreck, and that would eventually affect Olivia and Brian. So I've arranged a job for you. It's physical labor, nothing glamorous, but it will cover your rent and basic living expenses. Brooke's hope dimmed further. She had applied for jobs before, only to face rejection at every turn. Without Jake's intervention, she'd have to leave town entirely, forfeiting any chance of seeing her children again. As Jake's final words sank in, she realized her future was no longer hers to dictate. Jake handed Brooke a card with an address and phone number. Before she could respond, Gemma stepped in. This is your only chance to stay connected with your children. That job is the only option left for you once the lawsuits reach the court. Refuse and we'll wash our hands of you completely. And don't fool yourself. We're not taking your children from you. Olivia and Brian made their own choices. Olivia will live at St. Christopher's Crossing, and Brian is staying with Anna. They both know what you did to the man they thought was their father. Gemma gestured toward the door, signaling it was time for Brooke to leave. As they reached the threshold, Gemma turned, her tone sharp and unyielding. In the end, I win. I have Jake, and I'm carrying his children. Your selfishness ruined any chance you had with him. You gambled on the wrong man for luxury, and now you've lost everything. I have the better man, and you're left with nothing." Her glare hardened. "And let me make something crystal clear. If you try anything with Jake, you'll have me to deal with. Hurt him, manipulate the kids, or even attempt to turn them against him, and I will come for you. I won't stop until you're completely destroyed. Do you understand?" Brooke's confidence shattered as she stood frozen, stunned by the raw venom in Gemma's words. She barely managed a small, shaky response. "Yes, I understand. No contact with Jake unless it's through you." "Exactly. Now leave," Gemma snapped. The self-assured woman who had stared into the mirror earlier was gone. In less than an hour, Brooke's world had crumbled, leaving her hollow and defeated. Without another word, she walked to her car, shoulders slumped. Inside the house, Gemma returned to Jake, curling into his lap with a contented sigh. "You're mine," she murmured. "It took nearly 20 years, but we're finally together again. Despite Brooke, and thanks to her stupidity." After a quiet moment, she stood and tugged Jake to his feet, a mischievous smile on her lips. "We need to practice." "Practice for what?" Jake asked, bemused. "Number 3, of course," Gemma teased, giggling as she led him to the bedroom.